The compound smelled like old wood and silence. Mikoto stood at the kitchen window, hands still wet from washing the breakfast dishes, and watched the last of the morning light creep across the Uchiha district's stone-paved streets. Two women walked past carrying baskets of vegetables, their conversation just low enough that she couldn't catch the words. They glanced toward her window. She stepped back. It was reflex. She'd stopped thinking about why she did it years ago. Behind her, Sasuke sat at the low table with a piece of rice stuck to his cheek, trying to fold a paper shuriken from a page he'd torn out of one of Itachi's old academy workbooks. His small fingers kept bending the corners wrong, and every few seconds he'd huff through his nose and start over. "Mama, it's broken again. You're folding against the grain, turn it the other way." He flipped the paper, tongue poking out in concentration, and this time the fold held. "Ha!" He held it up, one arm crooked at a proud angle. "Wait till I show Niai-san." Mikoto dried her hands on the cloth by the sink. "Your brother left early. He has a mission briefing." "He always has mission stuff." Sasuke's triumph deflated. He set the paper shuriken down and poked at it. "Can I go to the park?" "After you clean your plate." "And wash your face. You've got rice on you." He swiped at the wrong cheek. She crossed the kitchen, knelt down, and thumbed the grain off the right one. His skin was warm. He grinned at her, gap-toothed and unguarded, and for a moment the tightness in her chest loosened. "Go on. Be back before the street lamps light." He scrambled out the door with the paper shuriken in his fist, sandals barely on, and she listened to his footsteps fade down the Ingawa and then the harder sound of them hitting stone. Then quiet again. She finished the dishes. She swept the kitchen floor. She folded the laundry she'd hung yesterday. She organized the weapons rack in the entryway that only Fugaku used, straightening kunai by size the way he preferred, even though he hadn't said a word to her about it, or about anything, in 4 days. 4 days. That was this week's count. Sometimes it stretched longer. The house was large for a family of 4. 3 bedrooms. A formal sitting room they never used, the kitchen that opened into the main living space. A small courtyard garden she'd planted with tomatoes and herbs because Sasuke liked tomatoes, and because tending something alive gave her a reason to kneel in the sun. It was a clan head's house. It was appropriate to their station. Fugaku's mother had died in this house, and his mother's mother before that. The walls had soaked up generations of Uchiha silence. Mikoto sat in the living room with a cup of tea she didn't drink and stared at the scroll rack across the room. Clan records, historical accounts, genealogy charts. She'd read them all during her first year as Fugaku's wife, thinking she should know the family she'd married into. She'd learned that the Uchiha kept meticulous records of every awakened Sharingan, every notable mission, every political appointment. They recorded births and deaths and marriages with careful precision. They did not record whether anyone had been happy. She was being maudlin. She recognized it the way you recognize a cloud pattern you've seen before, with tired familiarity rather than surprise. It came in waves, usually on days when Fugaku left before dawn and Itachi was unreachable, and Sasuke was the only voice in the house. She loved Sasuke with a fierceness that frightened her sometimes, but a 5-year-old's love, pure as it was, couldn't fill the particular shape of emptiness she carried. She'd tried to name it once. Loneliness was close but not precise. It was more like irrelevance. The sense that she'd been filed away. That the world was turning and she was standing still, in a house that smelled like old wood, waiting for a husband who would come home late and eat the dinner she'd prepared and go to his study and close the door. The tea went cold. She poured it out and rinsed the cup. The Uchiha district sat in the southeastern corner of Konoha like a walled city within a city. It had its own market street, its own shrine, its own administrative building where the military police force was headquartered. The walls weren't new. They'd been part of the district since before Mikoto was born, but the feeling of them had changed. Or maybe the village around them had changed. It was hard to tell from the inside. Mikoto walked to the market because the house was too quiet and because they needed scallions. The street was busy for mid-morning, women shopping, A few retired shinobi sitting outside the tea house, children chasing each other between the stalls. It looked normal. It looked like any district in any village, but there were details, if you knew where to look. The two chunin at the district's main gate, who checked everyone coming in and going out. They were Konoha military police, but they logged the movements of non-Uchiha visitors with a thoroughness that hadn't been required 5 years ago. The notice board outside the administrative building carried a new posting every week about community vigilance and clan unity in times of uncertainty. The older men gathered outside the tea house weren't just gossiping. Their conversations dropped to murmurs when anyone under 30 walked past, and their eyes tracked the Anbu who occasionally appeared on the rooftops at the district's perimeter. The Uchiha were angry. It was a slow, pressurized anger, the kind that didn't shout but seeped into everything. The Ninetails attack 5 years ago had broken something between the clan and the village, and nobody had bothered to fix it. The Uchiha had been relocated here, consolidated, monitored. Officially, it was for efficient rebuilding. Everyone knew what it actually was. Fugaku carried that anger like a second spine. It was what kept him upright during the endless meetings, the political maneuvering, the indignity of leading the village's police force while being treated like a suspect. Mikoto understood it. She even shared some of it. She'd been a kunoichi of this village. She'd fought for it, bled for it. And now she watched her clan penned in and surveilled while the third Hokage made sympathetic faces and did nothing. But understanding Fugaku's anger and living with it were different things. The anger had eaten the last soft parts of him. The man she'd married, who'd never been warm exactly, but had been present, had been capable of sitting with her in the garden and talking about something other than the clan. That man had been replaced by a political instrument. Clan head Fugaku. He inhabited the role so completely that she sometimes wondered if he remembered there was a person underneath. She bought the scallions. She bought a bundle of fresh fish because Sasuke liked grilled mackerel. She exchanged pleasantries with the fishmonger's wife, who complimented her hair and asked after Itachi's career with the bright-eyed intensity of a woman living vicariously through other people's children. On the way back, she passed the shrine and saw 3 clan elders standing in its shadow, heads bent together. One of them was Yakyumi, Fugaku's uncle, whose opinion carried weight in the clan council. He saw her and inclined his head with a politeness that felt like a closed door. Mikoto-san. Shopping. The usual. Good morning, Yakyumi-sama. Tell Fugaku we'll need him at the meeting tonight. There are things to discuss. There were always things to discuss. I'll pass the message. She walked home with the fish and the scallions and the knowledge, familiar as breathing, that she was not invited to those meetings. She'd been Anbu track before her marriage. She'd completed solo S-rank infiltration missions. She'd killed a man in the Land of Rain with a wire and a kunai at 19 and completed the objective and walked home without a scratch. But the Uchiha clan council was men and elders, and the clan head's wife was a role, not a seat. The house swallowed her when she stepped inside. She put the fish away and began preparing the marinade, and the silence pressed in like water. The mission assignment was routine, which meant it was boring, which meant Naruto had too much time to think. He was sitting on the branch of an oak tree about 40 meters above the forest floor, watching a trade road that hadn't seen a bandit in 6 hours. His assigned partner for this patrol, a chunin named Tekka with a weak chin and a habit of narrating everything he did, had gone to relieve himself behind a boulder 10 minutes ago and hadn't come back, which meant he'd probably found a comfortable spot and fallen asleep. Naruto didn't mind. The silence was better than conversation, which was something 22-year-old Naruto understood that 12-year-old Naruto wouldn't have believed. He'd changed. Not in the ways people expected. He was still loud when he wanted to be, still reckless by most people's standards, still the first one to volunteer for the mission nobody else wanted. But the sheer volume of his personality had developed a dial. He could turn it down. He'd learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely, and that being quiet wasn't the same as being invisible, and that the desperate need to be acknowledged that had driven him through his childhood could be set aside without disappearing entirely. It was still there. He just didn't let it steer anymore. The oak branch was wide enough to lie back on, so he did, lacing his fingers behind his head and staring up through the canopy at a sky that couldn't decide between blue and gray. The leaves filtered the light into shifting patterns on his face. A bird was building a nest 3 branches up, making repeated trips with twigs in its beak, totally indifferent to the shinobi sprawled below it. He thought about the mission report he'd have to write later and felt his soul leave his body preemptively. He thought about the ramen place near his apartment and whether they'd have the miso broth today or the pork. He thought about the Anbu mask he'd been offered last year and turned down because the idea of hiding his face felt like going backward. He thought about Kakashi, who'd offered it, and the look Kakashi had given him, that one visible eye carrying something between respect and worry. "You're strong enough, Naruto. The question is whether you want to be used that way." He'd said no. Not because he was afraid of the work, but because Anbu meant shadows and secrets and operating under the direct command of people he didn't fully trust. He'd rather be a jonin. He'd rather take missions with his face showing and come home and eat ramen and pretend that constituted a life. A hawk circled overhead, a messenger bird, Konoha trained, with a red band on its left leg that indicated priority dispatch. It wasn't looking for him. It banked east toward the village, and he watched it go. Tekka stumbled back into the clearing below, adjusting his belt. All clear down the south bend, nothing moving. Been nothing moving all day. Yeah, well, orders are orders. Naruto dropped from the branch, landing without sound. Shifts over in an hour. You want to do one more sweep or call it. Tekka squinted at the road. One more sweep. If the captain asks, I want to say we were thorough. They moved through the trees in standard patrol pattern, Naruto taking the high route and Tekka the low. The forest was calm. No bandits, no roguenin, no threats of any kind. Just trees and birds and the distant sound of a river. It was on the way back to the village, dropping through the canopy near the main gate, that Naruto saw her. She was leaving the Uchiha district's eastern exit, the smaller gate, the one that opened onto the path that ran along the Naka River. She had a basket on one arm, the kind women carried to the riverside washing stones, and her hair was down, which struck him as unusual even though he couldn't have said why. She walked like someone who wasn't in a hurry but wanted to be somewhere else. There was a particular quality to her stride, purposeful but tight, like she was holding her body on a short leash. He knew who she was. Everyone knew the clan heads' wives by sight, and Mikoto Uchiha had a face that was hard to forget. Fine-boned, dark-eyed, with a stillness to her features that made you uncertain whether she was calm or just very carefully controlled. He'd seen her at village functions, always standing slightly behind Fugaku, always composed, always appropriate. He'd never spoken to her directly. There'd been no reason to. Their lives occupied different orbits. He was a jonin who lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment near the commercial district and ate too much ramen. And she was the matriarch of the most powerful clan in the village. The social distance between them was vast enough that most people wouldn't have thought to measure it. But he saw her, and some part of his brain, the part that noticed things other people missed, that read body language the way other shinobi read terrain, registered that she looked tired. Not physically, although there was that too. Tired the way a person gets when they've been performing for so long they've forgotten what their real face feels like. He recognized it because he used to wear it himself. Tekka was already heading for the gate. Naruto, you coming? I want to file the report before the office closes. Yeah. He looked away from the river path. Coming. 3 days later, Mikoto was at the river. She came here when the compound felt like it was shrinking. The Naka River ran along the eastern edge of the Uchiha district, and then curved south through a stretch of forest, before joining the larger waterway that fed the village's irrigation system. There was a place about a 15-minute walk from the gate where the river widened into a shallow pool bordered by flat rocks, and years ago, before Itachi was born, before the Nine Tails, before everything, she used to come here to train. She didn't train anymore. Not formally. But her body remembered. And sometimes she'd stand on the flat rocks and run through old kata, just to feel her muscles do something they were designed for. Today, she was doing a water-walking exercise, standing on the river's surface with chakra concentrated in her soles, watching the current try to unbalance her. It was a genin skill. It was also meditative, requiring just enough focus to quiet the noise in her head. The afternoon was warm for late autumn. The trees along the bank were dropping leaves into the water, and they drifted around her feet like small boats. She closed her eyes and breathed and let the river's pull become the only thing she had to resist. She felt the chakra signature before she heard the footsteps. It was distinctive, large, warm, with an undercurrent of something vast and restless that most sensors would identify immediately. The nine-tails Jinchuriki. She opened her eyes and turned, one hand instinctively drifting toward the kunai pouch she still wore on her thigh out of habit, even though she hadn't used it in combat in years. He was standing on the riverbank about 20 meters upstream, looking at her with an expression of mild surprise, like he'd wandered into a room he didn't expect to be occupied. "Sorry," he said, raising a hand. "Didn't mean to, I was just cutting through, shortcut to the training grounds." She studied him for a moment. Uzumaki Naruto. She knew the basics. Jinchuriki, orphan, son of well. That particular secret was above her current clearance, but she'd been Anbutrak and she'd known Kushina. She'd known Kushina well. The boy's face was a mirror of his mother's coloring layered over features that were unmistakably Minato's, and anyone who'd known both parents and had functioning eyes could see it. The village's collective blindness on the subject was either a miracle of obedience or a failure of observation. He was taller than she'd expected, broader in the shoulders. The last time she'd seen him up close had been at a Hawkage memorial ceremony 2 years ago, and he'd still had the lanky, unfinished look of late adolescence. Now he looked solid. "Present. The training grounds are north," she said. He blinked, then he grinned a quick, self-deprecating flash. "Yeah, I know. I said it was a shortcut, not a good shortcut. I was following the river and got distracted." "By what?" He gestured vaguely at the trees, the water, the sky. "I don't know. It's nice out here, quiet." He paused. "You're Uchiha Mikoto-san, right?" "Yes. I know who you are." Something flickered across his face, a micro-expression she couldn't read, gone before it settled. He was used to people knowing who he was, but the knowing came in different flavors, and he was trying to determine hers. She saw him decide to test it. "Right, the fox thing, among other things." His eyebrows went up slightly. He took a few steps closer, not quite entering her space but closing the distance to conversational range. "You're water-walking." Observant. "I mean, I haven't seen anyone do that just for fun since the academy." "It's not for fun. It's for focus." He nodded slowly, looking at her feet on the water's surface, at the small ripples where her chakra met the current. "You keep your distribution really even. Most people let it pool at the heels." She looked at him. It was a technically precise observation, the kind a sensor type or a very experienced shinobi would make. It didn't match his reputation as a brute force brawler. "You have a sensor's eye." "I have the fox's eye sometimes." He notices chakra the way normal people notice smells. He said it casually, the way you'd mention a roommate's annoying habit. "But you've got good control. Like, really good. Jonin level at least." "I was Jonin." "Was?" The question sat between them. She stepped off the water onto the nearest flat rock, movements precise, not a drop displaced. "I retired from active duty when I married." "By choice?" She looked at him again, harder this time. He wasn't being aggressive or pointed. He was just asking. With the unguarded directness of someone who hadn't yet learned that some questions were better left unasked in polite company, or who'd learned it and decided not to care. "It was expected," she said, which wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. He sat down on the riverbank, legs stretched out in front of him, and tilted his face toward the sun. He didn't seem inclined to leave. She could feel his chakra. It radiated warmth like a low fire, steady and huge, and underneath it the nine-tails pulsed like a second heartbeat. It should have made her wary. It didn't. My mother trained here, he said. I think, Mikoto went very still. How do you know that? I don't really, there's a feeling sometimes in places. Like déjà vu, but not mine. He frowned, trying to articulate something slippery. The fox remembers things from before, from when he was sealed in her. Fragments. Sometimes when I'm in a place she spent time, I get this. Warmth, not a memory, more like the ghost of one. He was talking about Kushina. And he didn't know, or maybe he did, from the fox's fragments, that Mikoto and Kushina had been close. Closer than most people realized. They'd trained together as teenagers, two outsiders in different ways. Kushina, the foreign-born Jinchuriki, with the wild hair and wilder temper. Mikoto, the Uchiha girl who was too talented for the role her clan had planned for her. They'd sparred on these same rocks. Kushina had fallen in the river at least 15 times, cursing so creatively that Mikoto's ears burned, and Mikoto had laughed, really laughed, the kind that made your stomach hurt, for the first time since her father had told her she would marry Fugaku. She did train here, Mikoto said quietly. We both did. Naruto's head turned. His blue eyes were very bright in the afternoon light. You knew her. She was my closest friend. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms when two people suddenly realize they're sharing a space that's bigger than the conversation that brought them to it. Naruto stared at her with an expression that was raw in a way she hadn't expected. Hunger, grief, wonder, all braided together. Nobody ever tells me about her, he said. The third says he can't. Kakashi-sensei changes the subject. Jiraiya-sensei tells me she was one hell of a woman and then starts crying into his sake. I know her name. I know she was from Whirlpool. I know she loved me. His voice was steady, but his hands had tightened on his knees. I don't know what she sounded like. Mikoto should have walked away. She should have said something polite and deflecting and gone back to the compound and the fish and the silence. This was not her responsibility. This was a young man she didn't know, carrying grief she couldn't fix, asking for something she wasn't sure she had the right to give. She sat down on the rock across from him. She was loud, Mikoto said. Louder than you, even. She swore constantly and burned everything she tried to cook, and she could never sit still. She'd fidget during briefings until the commander wanted to throw something at her. She was terrible at genjutsu, and she didn't care because she could just punch through it. She arm-wrestled Fugaku once at a festival and won, and he didn't speak to anyone for a week. Naruto was leaning forward, eyes wide, drinking it in like water. She cried at everything, Mikoto continued. Happy things, sad things, beautiful things. She cried when she saw baby animals. She cried when she ate really good food. She once cried because a sunset was particularly orange, and she said it was her favorite color, and it felt like the sky was doing it just for her. Naruto made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else entirely. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. Orange? Yeah. She was the bravest person I ever knew, not because she wasn't afraid, she was afraid all the time. Of the fox, of losing control, of being alone. She was brave because she was terrified and she did everything anyway. The river moved around the rocks, and the leaves drifted, and the afternoon light went gold, and Naruto Uzumaki cried quietly on the riverbank while a woman he'd just met told him about his mother. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't apologize for it. He just let it happen, and when it passed, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at her with eyes that were red-rimmed and grateful and fiercely, painfully alive. Thank you, he said. Mikoto-san, I thank you, she nodded. Her own eyes were stinging, but she held it. They sat for a while longer. He asked more questions, small ones, specific ones, the kind that told her he'd been building a mental picture of his mother for years from whatever scraps he could gather, and was now trying to fit these new pieces in. What did she eat for breakfast? Did she like mornings or nights? Was she good at shogi? Did she sing? Mikoto answered them all. Some answers came easily, others she had to dig for, reaching back into memories she hadn't touched in years. It hurt, like reopening a room that had been sealed. But it was the kind of hurt that moved something, that had a direction. The light shifted. Late afternoon. She needed to get back. Sasuke would be home soon, and dinner wouldn't prepare itself, and Fugaku had a meeting tonight, which meant he'd want to eat early so he could shut himself in his study and prepare. I should go, she said, standing and brushing off her clothes. Naruto stood too awkwardly, like he'd forgotten how to transition from emotional vulnerability back to normal human interaction. Yeah, right. I should also, there's a thing I have to. He stopped, took a breath, and tried again. Can I come back? Here, I mean. Not to bother you or anything. Just if you're here sometimes, and I'm here sometimes, and you felt like telling me more about her. I'm here most afternoons, when the weather holds. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was a door left slightly open, and his face told her he understood the difference. Okay, he said. Most afternoons. She picked up her basket and walked back toward the compound. She didn't look back. She could feel his chakra, that warm, enormous presence, watching her go, and she carried the heat of it with her all the way home like a coal in her chest. Fugaku came home at 7. He ate the mackerel and rice without comment. He drank tea. He told Sasuke to practice his kunai forms tomorrow, and said he'd watch if he had time, which they both knew meant he wouldn't. Sasuke went to bed with a paper shuriken collection that now numbered 6. Mikoto tucked him in and kissed his forehead and stood in his doorway for a long moment, listening to him breathe. Itachi came home at 8, moving through the house with the deliberate quietness of a boy who'd learned to navigate around his father's moods. He stopped in the kitchen where Mikoto was putting away the last of the dishes. How was the mission? She asked. Fine. C-rank escort to the border, uneventful. He was 10 and he sounded 40. He reached for an apple from the basket on the counter. Father's in his study. Meeting. He left 20 minutes ago. Itachi nodded. He bit into the apple and chewed, watching her. He had Fugaku's face but her eyes, or rather, her eyes' capacity for seeing. Fugaku observed to assess. Itachi observed to understand. You seem different today, he said. Different how? He considered it with the seriousness he brought to everything. Less tired, or maybe a different kind of tired, I'm not sure. She almost smiled. Her brilliant, impossible boy who noticed everything and kept it all behind a face that gave nothing away. She wondered sometimes what it cost him, the noticing, whether it was a burden or a gift or both. I saw an old friend today, she said, which was close enough to the truth. We talked about someone we both missed. Itachi accepted this with a nod. He finished his apple, disposed of the core, and drifted toward his room. At the hallway, he paused. Mother. Yes, the meeting tonight, the one father went to. Do you know what it's about? The question was careful. Itachi was always careful. But there was something underneath it. An urgency, or maybe an anxiety, that he was keeping on a very tight leash. I don't, she said. He doesn't tell me about council business. Itachi looked at her for a moment longer, and she had the sudden, disorienting sense that her 10-year-old son knew more about what was happening in this clan than she did. Okay, he said. Good night, Mother. Good night, Itachi. He disappeared down the hallway. She heard his door close, softly, precisely, without a sound wasted. Mikoto stood alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now. Not smaller exactly, just more visible. Like she'd been looking at it through frosted glass for years and someone had wiped a clear spot. She thought about a young man with his mother's bright eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, sitting on a riverbank crying without shame. She thought about Kushina, who'd been loud and afraid and brave. She thought about the flat rocks by the river and how her body had remembered the kata without being told, like the muscles had been waiting. She went to bed before Fugaku came home. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around her and felt, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, something that she couldn't yet name, but that felt dangerously close to anticipation. He came back 2 days later. She was already there, running through a taijutsu form on the flat rocks, and she felt his chakra before he cleared the tree line. He sat on the bank and watched her finish the set without interrupting, which she appreciated. You're really good, he said when she stopped. Like I've trained with Jonin who don't move like that. I had 20 years of practice. And then you stopped. And then I stopped. He pulled a bento box from his pack and opened it, revealing 2 portions of rice and grilled chicken. I brought lunch, in case you were hungry. Or in case it made this less weird. Is this weird? A little. I'm sitting in the woods eating lunch with the head of the Uchiha clan's wife, who's also the only person in the village willing to tell me about my mom. It's at least a 6 on the weird scale. She accepted the portion he offered. The chicken was over-seasoned, and the rice was slightly dry, which meant he'd made it himself. They ate sitting across from each other, her on the rocks and him on the bank, with the river between them. He told her about his morning. A D-rank mission that turned into a C-rank when the client's missing cat turned out to be a summoning animal that someone had stolen, leading to a chase across 3 rooftops and a confrontation with a genin team from another village who'd wandered into Fire Country territory by accident. He told it well, animated, funny, self-deprecating about the part where he'd crashed through a market stall. She told him about Kushina's first attempt at learning the Rasengan, which Minato had taught her in secret, and how she'd put a hole through their apartment wall and then tried to hide it with a tapestry before Minato got home. Did he notice? He was the 4th Hokage. Of course he noticed. And he put up a nicer tapestry and never mentioned it. Naruto grinned. It was the same grin she'd seen from Kushina 1,000 times, wide and warm and slightly crooked. The resemblance was an ache. That sounds like him, or what I've heard of him. He picked at his rice. Did you know him too? Minato? Everyone knew Minato. He was difficult not to know, brilliant, kind, impossible to dislike. Fugaku disliked him anyway on principle because he'd been passed over for the Hokage position. She paused. But yes, through Kushina I knew him well enough. He loved her in a way that was almost embarrassing to be around. He'd look at her across a room and his whole face would change, and she'd pretend she didn't notice, but she always noticed. Naruto set down his chopsticks. His expression had gone quiet, concentrated, like he was trying to absorb something through his skin. I wish, he started, then stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter. Say it. I wish I'd had that, what they had. I don't mean romantic, I just mean the being known part. Having someone who looks at you and their face changes. The words landed in Mikoto's chest like a stone in still water, and the ripples spread outward into places she hadn't given anyone permission to touch. She looked at this young man, parentless, friendless for most of his childhood, carrying a burden inside him that would have broken most people, and saw the loneliness he'd learned to live around but never outgrown. She recognized it because she wore the same one. I know what you mean, she said, and it came out quieter than she intended. Their eyes met across the river. The moment stretched. Something shifted, subtle, tectonic, the way the ground moves before an earthquake when only the animals can feel it. Naruto looked away first. He rubbed the back of his neck and said something about needing to return a library book, and the moment passed, and they finished their lunch and parted with the same unspoken agreement. Most afternoons, when the weather holds. She went home and made dinner and helped Sasuke with his academy homework and folded laundry and lay in bed next to a husband who slept with his back to her. And she pressed her hand against her own sternum and felt the place where the stone had landed, and the ripples were still moving. Itachi was watching. Not his mother specifically, he watched everything, a habit so deeply ingrained that he couldn't remember acquiring it. But his mother was part of everything, and lately she'd been different, and different was a category that demanded attention. It was small things. She hummed while cooking, which she hadn't done in months. She went to the river more frequently and came back with a looseness in her shoulders that hadn't been there when she left. She asked him about his missions with more specificity than usual, not just, how was it, but what was the terrain like, and did you use that approach I showed you? Like she was remembering that she knew things about being a shinobi, and the remembering was waking something up. He should have been glad. He loved his mother, quietly, fiercely, in the secret chamber of himself that he kept locked against the world. And her unhappiness was a constant, low-grade pain that he'd learned to live with the way you learn to live with a bad knee. Seeing her less unhappy should have been uncomplicated. But nothing in Itachi's life was uncomplicated. He was sitting on the roof of the clan armory, 3 hours past midnight, watching the district sleep. Below him, the streets were empty. In the houses, the Uchiha slept or didn't sleep, and the ones who didn't were the ones he was worried about. The meeting tonight had been worse than the last one. Fugaku's voice had carried through the council chamber's walls, not the words, but the tone. Flat, hard, certain, the voice of a man who'd stopped considering alternatives. The elders had murmured agreement like a tide coming in. Itachi had stood outside the door and listened, and what he'd heard had settled in his stomach like ice. They were moving toward it. Slowly, methodically, with the careful planning that was the Uchiha's greatest strength and greatest danger. A coup, an overthrow of the village leadership. They'd been dancing around it for years, but the dance was ending, and what came next was either action or collapse, and Fugaku was not a man built for collapse. The third Hokage knew. Itachi was certain of this because the third had asked him. Obliquely, in the way old men asked things when they wanted answers without the accountability of having asked, to keep him informed. To be a set of eyes inside the compound. To be, in plain language, a spy on his own family. Itachi had agreed. Not because he wanted to, but because the alternative was a war that would destroy the clan from the outside instead of the inside, and between those two destructions, the one that came with information at least offered the possibility of control. He was 10 years old. He was a Chunin. He was a spy. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He thought about his mother's humming and wondered what was causing it, and whether it was something he should be worried about or grateful for. He thought about Sasuke, asleep in his bed with a growing collection of paper shuriken, innocent of all of this. And the thought was a blade that he turned inward because there was nowhere else for it to go. Below him, a figure moved through the streets. Anbu, he could tell by the movement pattern, the deliberate use of shadow, the mask that caught a sliver of moonlight before disappearing. They weren't Uchiha. They were village Anbu, and they were inside the district, which meant either the third had authorized surveillance or someone else had. The figure moved toward the eastern wall, paused at the rooftop of a house near the gate, and spent 40 seconds doing something Itachi couldn't see before moving on. Placing a sensor seal, most likely. Monitoring movement in and out of the district. If it was the third's order, it was cautious. If it was Danzo's, it was something else entirely. Itachi tracked the Anbu until they left the district, then stayed on the roof for another hour, cataloging the patrol pattern, the timing, the entry and exit points. Information was currency, and he was very, very rich. When he finally went home, he passed his mother's bedroom. The door was closed. Inside, he could hear the rhythm of two people breathing, his father's deep, steady exhale and his mother's lighter, slightly irregular pattern. She was awake. He moved on. He checked Sasuke's room, sound asleep. Blanket kicked off as usual, one arm flung out to the side. Itachi pulled the blanket back up and tucked it around his brother's small body and stood there for a moment, one hand on the doorframe, and felt the weight of everything he knew pressing down on him like a physical force. He went to his own room. He did not sleep. The afternoons by the river became a pattern. Not every day, that would have been reckless, and Mikoto was many things, but reckless was not one of them. Every 2 or 3 days, when the weather held and her household duties allowed and Fugaku was occupied with clan business, she'd walk to the river with her basket and her kunai pouch and find Naruto there. Or she'd arrive first and feel his chakra approaching. Or they'd arrive at the same time and pretend it was coincidence, even though the pretense was wearing thin. They talked about Kushina. They talked about missions, hers from the past and his from the present. They talked about techniques. She corrected his fire-style fundamentals, which were atrocious, and he showed her a wind-style compression trick he'd developed that made her eyebrows rise in genuine surprise. Where did you learn that? Nowhere. I made it up. You made up a B-rank wind technique. I make up a lot of stuff. Most of it doesn't work. This one did. He demonstrated again, compressing a sphere of wind chakra between his palms until it hummed like a tuning fork. The trick is rotation. You have to spin it against itself. That's the Rasengan principle. Yeah, well. Turns out that's useful for more than just the one thing. She watched him train and saw, beneath the improvisational chaos of his style, a mind that understood chakra on an intuitive level that most people never reached through study alone. He was raw. He was unpolished. He was also operating at a level that his Jonin rank didn't adequately represent, and she suspected the people who assigned his missions knew it and didn't know what to do about it. "Why don't you push for a promotion?" she asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the rocks, sharing a bag of rice crackers he'd brought from the village, and the question had been building for a while. To what? There's nothing above Jonin except Hokage and Anbu, and I turned down Anbu. There's special Jonin advisory. There's the tactical corps. There's Naruto. You could be heading a division. He crunched a cracker thoughtfully. Probably, but that stuff is political, and I'm not good at political. You're better at it than you think. Maybe, but the people who control those appointments don't want me in those positions. A Jinchuriki leading a division, the council would choke. He said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. She felt a surge of anger on his behalf that surprised her old anger, the kind she'd felt as a young kunoichi watching the village's power structures operate on prejudice and inertia while pretending to be meritocratic. "That's not right," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at her. "But you know about that. The Uchiha get the same treatment." "That's different." "Is it? Village decides a group is dangerous, pushes them to the margins, watches them, waits for them to prove the suspicion right." He shrugged. "Seems pretty similar from where I'm sitting." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He wasn't wrong. She'd never thought about it from that angle before, the parallel between the Jinchuriki's isolation and the Uchiha's. Both were containers, in a sense. Both were feared for what they held. "When did you get perceptive?" she said. He grinned. "I've always been perceptive, I just hide it behind the loud stuff." "Why?" The grin faded into something more honest. "Because when people think you're simple, they show you who they really are. They don't guard themselves, and then you know them." She stared at him. He held her gaze, and for a moment, she saw past the grin and the energy and the performance to something underneath that was still and watchful and much older than 22. "You're not what people think you are," she said. "Neither are you." The river kept moving. The leaves kept falling. They sat on the rocks and ate rice crackers and didn't say anything for a while, and the silence was the most comfortable thing Mikoto had felt in years. The mission request came on a Tuesday. Naruto was in the Hokage's office, which always smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper, standing in front of the third's desk, while Hiruzen reviewed a scroll with the unhurried pace of a man who had all the time in the world and wanted you to know it. B-rank escort to the land of hot springs. Diplomatic envoy. 3 days out, 2 days on site, 3 days back. "Why me?" The envoy requested a high-level escort specifically. "You have a reputation." "For what?" Hiruzen's eyes crinkled. "For being conspicuous. The envoy wants the other nations to see who's protecting them." "It's a statement. So I'm a scarecrow. You're a deterrent. There's a difference." Hiruzen set the scroll down and laced his fingers on the desk. "How are you, Naruto?" The question was warm and genuine, the way Hiruzen's questions always were, but Naruto had learned, was still learning to hear the layers underneath. The third didn't ask idle questions. "I'm fine. Busy, the usual." "You've been spending time outside the village, near the Naka River." Naruto's heart rate stayed steady because he'd trained it to, but something in his gut tightened. "I train out there sometimes. It's quiet." Hiruzen nodded slowly. "It is quiet. Beautiful area." He picked up his pipe, turned it in his fingers without lighting it. "The Uchiha District's eastern gate opens onto that path." "Does it, Naruto? I'm not doing anything wrong." "I didn't say you were." Hiruzen's voice was gentle, and that was somehow worse than if he'd been stern. "I'm saying be careful. The situation with the Uchiha is delicate. Any unusual contact draws attention from them and from others." "Others?" Hiruzen didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Naruto thought about the Anbu patrols, the surveillance, the invisible web of observation that surrounded the Uchiha district, and wondered exactly how much the third knew and how much he was guessing. "I'll take the mission," Naruto said. "When do I leave?" tomorrow morning. He left the office and walked through the village toward his apartment, and the afternoon was bright and warm, and he was thinking about a woman sitting on river rocks with leaves drifting around her feet, and he was thinking about the fact that someone had noticed. And he was thinking about the word careful and how it sounded different when it came from the hawkage than when it came from a friend. He went to the river that evening, even though it wasn't their usual rhythm, because he was leaving tomorrow and he wanted to tell her. She wasn't there. He sat on the bank and watched the water until the light was gone. Then went home and packed for the mission, and didn't examine the feeling in his chest too closely. Because examining it would mean naming it, and naming it would mean admitting that what had started as grief shared between two lonely people had become something else. Something that had its own gravity now, something that was pulling. Mikoto felt his absence like a change in air pressure, subtle, pervasive, undeniable. 3 days passed without his chakra signature warming the tree line. Then 4, then 5. She went to the river anyway, trained on the rocks, practiced kata she hadn't performed in a decade, and felt foolish for the disappointment that curled in her stomach each time she reached for his presence, and found only the ordinary, neutral hum of the forest. On the 6th day, she snapped at Sasuke for leaving his sandals in the entryway, and then immediately apologized with a fierceness that confused him. She burnt the rice for dinner. She never burnt the rice, and Fugaku looked at it and looked at her and said nothing, which was his way of saying everything. She was in trouble. She knew it the way she'd known, in the field, when a mission was about to go sideways. The instinct that fires before the brain catches up, the animal recognition of a situation that has outpaced your planning. She was not a girl. She was a 30-year-old mother of 2 with a husband and a clan and responsibilities that stretched in every direction. And she was standing in her kitchen scraping burnt rice out of a pot and thinking about a 22-year-old man's blue eyes, and the way he said neither are you like it was the most obvious thing in the world. This was not loneliness. Loneliness, she knew. This was something with edges, something directional, and it was aimed at a specific person, and that made it dangerous in a way that loneliness never was. She finished the dishes. She tucked Sasuke in. She passed Itachi's room and heard the scratch of a pen. He was writing something, a mission report probably, or maybe something else, and she didn't knock because Itachi's privacy was one of the few things she could give him that felt like a gift rather than an obligation. She went to bed. Fugaku was already there, his back a wall of silence. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Kushina, who had been brave, who had done everything while terrified. And she thought about a door left slightly open, and whether the right thing to do was to close it or walk through. The ceiling didn't answer. She turned on her side and pressed her face into the pillow and waited for sleep that came slowly and brought dreams she didn't remember. He came back on the 8th day. She was on the rocks, running through a complex fire-style kata that she'd learned at 15 and still knew in her bones, and she felt his chakra. Warm, vast, unmistakable, hit the edge of her awareness like sunrise hitting a window. She finished the kata. She turned. He was at the tree line, leaning against an oak with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. It was open and undefended, and it made her breath catch. "Hey," he said, "you were gone. Mission, hot springs, diplomatic thing." He pushed off the tree and walked toward the bank. "I would have told you, but you weren't here the night before I left. I didn't know you'd come looking." He stopped at the water's edge. The river ran between them, narrow here, maybe 4 meters, shallow enough to wade. His eyes were very blue. Mikoto. It was the first time he'd said her name without the honorific. It landed like a touch. "Naruto, I thought about you every day I was gone." He said it simply, without performance, the way he said everything that mattered. "I tried not to. It didn't work. She should stop this." She knew, with the clarity of a woman who'd spent her adult life calculating risk, exactly what was happening and exactly what it would cost. She could see the consequences arrayed before her like pieces on a shogi board. Fugaku, the clan, her sons, his career, the political implications, the danger. She could see all of it. "I burnt the rice," she said. He blinked. What? On the third day you were gone. I was distracted and I burnt the rice. I never burn the rice. Fugaku looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He stared at her, and then he started laughing, not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that broke open his whole face. You burnt the rice. It's not funny. It's a little funny. It was humiliating. Mikoto. He was still laughing, but his eyes were serious. I ate nothing but terrible mission rations for 8 days and thought about your rice crackers every single meal. Those were store-bought. I don't care. You handed them to me. The river ran between them. 4 meters. She could close it in a step, water-walking, one pulse of chakra to the soles of her feet. She didn't move. He didn't move. They stood on opposite banks and looked at each other, and the looking was enough to make the air feel heavy. This is dangerous, she said. I know. I have children. I know. I have a husband. I know. If anyone found out, I know, Mikoto. She closed her eyes. The river's sound filled the space where words should have been. She felt the current pulling at her chakra, the sun on her face, the weight of every obligation she carried pressing down like a hand on her shoulders. She felt, underneath all of it, the thing she couldn't name anymore, the thing that had grown past the point where she could pretend it was nostalgia or friendship or a shared grief about a dead woman's memory. It was hunger. Simple and terrifying, and aimed directly at the man standing 4 meters away across a river that might as well have been an ocean. She opened her eyes. Most afternoons, she said, when the weather holds. He looked at her, and his face changed the way she'd described Minato's changing when he looked at Kushina, and she thought, oh, there it is. She picked up her basket and walked home, and the distance between the river and the compound had never felt longer. And the house had never felt smaller, and the ceiling that night had never been more silent. But the anticipation was back, sharper than before, edged with fear and want in equal measure. She lay in the dark beside her sleeping husband and pressed her hand against her sternum and felt the ripples still moving, and she thought, this is how it starts, not with a decision. Not with a single dramatic moment, but with a door left open, and a name said without an honorific and burnt rice, and the understanding, quiet and certain and terrifying, that you are no longer who you were yesterday. The compound smelled like old wood and silence. But underneath it, something new was growing. Chapter 2. What burns quiet the rain came sideways through the trees, and Naruto didn't care. He was drenched, standing ankle-deep in the river shallows with his hands locked in a seal, pushing wind chakra through a rotation pattern that Mikoto had sketched for him in the dirt 3 days ago. The concept was simple layer wind over fire to create a compression effect that could triple the range of a standard fireball. The execution was anything but. Every time he got the rotation speed right, the elemental balance slipped, and the wind either snuffed the fire or scattered it into a useless shower of sparks. Your timing's off, Mikoto said from the bank. She was sitting under the oak tree's canopy, mostly dry, with her arms crossed, and the faintly exasperated expression of a teacher watching a gifted student slam face first into a wall he could easily walk around. You're feeding the wind before the fire has shape. It needs structure first. I'm giving it structure. You're giving it enthusiasm. Those aren't the same thing. He let the jutsu collapse, shaking singed residue off his fingers, and turned to face her. Rain ran down his face and plastered his hair flat against his skull, and he was grinning because the frustration was the kind that sharpened him rather than dulled him. And because she was here, and because she was teaching him. And because the sound of her voice correcting his technique was rapidly becoming his favorite sound in the world. Show me again, he said. She sighed. A sound that carried the specific weight of a woman who'd said watch closely this time 4 times already, and stood. She moved to the water's edge, formed 3 seals with the fluid economy of someone who'd performed them 10,000 times, and breathed. The fireball that left her mouth was small, no larger than a fist, but it was dense. He could see the chakra packed into it like light compressed into a jewel. It hung in the air for a fraction of a second, perfectly formed, and then her left hand came up, and a blade of wind hit it from underneath, And the fireball didn't scatter, it stretched, elongating into a lance of white-hot flame that punched across the river and hit the opposite bank hard enough to vaporize the rain in a 10-meter radius. Steam billowed upward. The sound was a crack, not a roar. Precise. She lowered her hand. Structure first, then force. That's. You held the fire in midair. Shape manipulation. I hold the chakra envelope until the wind catches it. For how long? As long as I need to. When I was active, I could hold 4 simultaneously. He stared at her. She was standing in the rain, her dark hair stuck to her neck, wearing a simple training wrap that showed the lean muscle definition in her arms. Muscle that years of domesticity hadn't fully erased, and she was the most formidable person he'd ever seen who wasn't currently trying to kill him. The gap between who she was in this moment and who she was inside the Uchiha compound, smiling politely, carrying baskets, deferring to elders, was so vast it made something in his chest ache. You should be on the active roster, he said. We've discussed this. Yeah, and your answer was garbage then too. Her mouth twitched. Not a smile. She was too controlled for that when they were sparring intellectually as well as physically, but the ghost of one. My answer was realistic. There is no mechanism for a clan head's wife to return to active duty. It's not a rule. It's just the way things are. The way things are is a fancy way of saying nobody's bothered to change it. Naruto. What? You can throw a compressed fire lance hard enough to punch through stone and you're spending your days folding laundry. Tell me that makes sense. It doesn't have to make sense. It has to make peace. She pushed wet hair from her face. If I returned to active duty, it would be a statement. The clan head's wife, operating outside the compound, taking orders from village command. Fugaku would see it as a betrayal. The elders would see it as impropriety. The clan would see it as a crack in the wall they're trying to hold together. And what do you see it as? She looked at him through the rain, and her dark eyes held something that was neither resignation nor acceptance, but something harder. Something with teeth that she kept carefully caged. I see it as a conversation I stopped having with myself a long time ago because it only leads to places I can't go. He wanted to argue. He wanted to grab the conversation by the throat and shake it until a different answer fell out. But he'd learned, was still learning, that Mikoto's walls weren't built from weakness. They were built from a clear-eyed assessment of the ground she stood on, and pushing against them without understanding their architecture was just another form of arrogance. So he bit down on the argument and said, "Teach me the shape manipulation." She did. For the next hour in the rain, they worked through the technique until his fingers cramped and his chakra reserves, which were absurd by any normal standard, actually registered a noticeable dip. He couldn't hold the fire the way she did. His control was too coarse, his nature too inclined toward force over precision. But by the end, he could hold it for almost a full second, which she said was better than most Chunin managed after a week of practice. You learn fast, she said. They were sitting under the oak now, both of them drenched, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The rain was thinning to a drizzle. Faster than anyone I've trained. You've trained people. Before. Young Uchiha mostly, fire-style fundamentals, I was good at it. A pause. I liked it. What happened? Sasuke was born, and Fugaku decided the clan's children should be trained by the police force instructors instead, more standardized, more disciplined. She said it without inflection, which was its own kind of inflection. He wasn't wrong, technically. The instructors had a curriculum. I was just improvising. Improvising is how I learned everything. I know, it's why your fundamentals are terrible and your instincts are extraordinary, he laughed. That's the nicest insult anyone's ever given me, she smiled. A real one, small, private, the corners of her mouth lifting in a way that changed the geometry of her face from composed to warm. He'd started cataloging her smiles because they were rare enough to be worth tracking. This one was new, less guarded than the ones before. Like she'd decided, somewhere in the last hour of rain and fire and shared effort, to stop checking whether the smile was appropriate before letting it happen. Your mother smiled like that, she said quietly. Then she caught herself, looked away. Sorry, I keep doing that, seeing her in you. Don't apologize. I want to see what you see. She turned back to him, and their eyes met, and the space between them was very small and very charged, and the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with moisture, and neither of them moved. What do you see? She asked. When you look at me. The question was a door. Not left slightly open this time, thrown wide. He could feel the weight of it, the vulnerability it cost her, the risk embedded in the asking. She was not a woman who asked questions she didn't want answers to. I see someone who's been holding still for so long she's forgotten she can move, he said. And I see what happens when she remembers. Her breath caught. He heard it, a small, sharp intake, involuntary, like he'd touched a nerve she hadn't known was exposed. Naruto, I know, dangerous, children. Husband, I know all of it. Then you understand why. I understand why you think you need to keep holding still. I just don't agree with the reasoning. The drizzle picked up again. A drop of water ran from her hair down the line of her jaw and hung at her chin for a moment before falling. He watched it with the kind of attention he usually reserved for reading an opponent's movements in a fight. She stood, brushed wet leaves from her clothes. I need to go. Sasuke will be home soon. He stood too. Mikoto. She paused, half turned away from him. For what it's worth, the fire lance thing was incredible. She didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders relax by a fraction, and when she spoke, her voice had the smallest edge of warmth. Practice the shape manipulation. We'll try again Thursday. She walked away through the trees, and the rain closed around her like a curtain, and Naruto stood under the oak with his heart hammering against his ribs, and the taste of ozone on his tongue from the fire technique, and the feeling, electric, unmistakable. Terrifying, that something between them had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Fugaku's study was a small room at the back of the house, separated from the main living space by a sliding door that he kept closed. Mikoto had been inside it perhaps a dozen times in their marriage. It held a desk, a weapons rack, shelves of scrolls, and the faint smell of ink and steel. It was Fugaku's territory, and the boundary was understood. Tonight, the sliding door was open. She noticed it when she came downstairs after putting Sasuke to bed. The hallway was dim, lit only by the lamp in the living room, and the study gaped at the end of it like a mouth. Inside, Fugaku sat at his desk, writing. She could see his profile, straight back, sharp jawline, the disciplined stillness that was so different from Naruto's restless energy. She would have passed by, she always passed by, but he spoke without looking up. Mikoto, she stopped. Yes, come in. She entered the study and stood near the door, uncertain. He finished whatever he was writing, set the brush down, and turned to face her. His Sharingan was not active, he rarely used it at home, but his eyes carried the same quality of assessment regardless. How are the boys? Fine. Sasuke's asleep. Itachi hasn't come home yet. He's on assignment, he'll be late. Fugaku folded his hands on the desk. I've been reviewing the household accounts. You've been purchasing less from the clan market. She blinked. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, this wasn't on the list. I've been going to the village market for some things. The selection is better. The village market is outside the district. I'm aware. You've been leaving the compound more frequently. There it was. Not a question, a statement, delivered with the flat precision of a man who tracked movements the way he tracked intelligence reports. She felt a cold trickle of alarm, followed immediately by the trained calm that had kept her alive during her years in the field. I've been training at the river, staying active. Training. He said the word like he was testing its weight. You haven't trained in years. I've decided to start again. His eyes narrowed, not suspiciously, exactly, more like recalculation. He was adjusting his model of her, and the adjustment required effort because she'd been static in his model for so long that any change registered as an anomaly. Why now? Because a 22-year-old Jinchuriki told me I was wasting myself. Because I remembered what my body could do, and the remembering made me angry. Because I spent a decade folding your laundry and organizing your kunai rack, and the person who did that was someone I don't recognize anymore. Because I want to, she said. Fugaku studied her for a long moment. She held his gaze without flinching, without yielding, and she saw something shift behind his eyes, surprise, maybe? Or the memory of surprise. He'd married a kunoichi. Somewhere under the layers of political calculation and clan duty, he might remember that. Fine, he said, but be discreet. The situation is sensitive. I don't want the clan's attention on my wife's comings and goings. I'm always discreet. I know you are. He paused, and for a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, something that might have been regret passed across his features. That's not what I meant. She waited, but he'd already turned back to his desk and picked up the brush. The conversation was over. She left the study and slid the door closed behind her and stood in the dim hallway with her pulse steady and her mind racing. He'd noticed. Not the substance, he had no idea about Naruto, she was certain of that, but the pattern. The increased absences, the change in her behavior. He'd filed it and raised it and accepted her answer, but the filing meant it was now data in whatever calculus he was running. She needed to be more careful, or she needed to stop. The thought of stopping sat in her chest like a stone. She went to the kitchen and made tea she didn't drink and stared at the dark window and the reflection of a woman who was making choices that could destroy everything. And the woman in the glass looked back at her with Kushina's kind of bravery, the kind that was terrified and did it anyway. Across the village, in a basement office that appeared on no official floor plan, Shimura Danzo read a report and allowed himself the smallest contraction of his visible eye. The report was brief, as all rude intelligence was. Economy of language was a discipline he'd instilled in his operatives from their first day of training. A single page, handwritten in the coded script that only he and his agents could read, detailing the surveillance findings from the Uchiha district's eastern perimeter over the past 3 weeks. The Uchiha situation was, on the whole, developing as he'd anticipated. The clan's trajectory toward confrontation was accelerating along a predictable curve, and his preparations were proceeding accordingly. The Third Hokage's attempts at diplomacy were, as always, half measures that addressed symptoms while ignoring the disease. Hiruzen's weakness was his compassion, which blinded him to the reality that some problems could only be solved by excision. But the report contained an anomaly, and Danzo did not like anomalies. The Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto, had been observed in proximity to the Uchiha district's eastern boundary on multiple occasions over the past month. His stated purpose, training near the Naka River, was plausible but insufficient to explain the frequency and regularity of his visits. More significantly, his visits correlated with the movements of Uchiha Mikoto, wife of the clan head, who had been observed leaving the compound through the eastern gate at corresponding times. The report did not speculate. Root operatives reported facts. Speculation was Danzo's prerogative. He set the paper down and pressed his fingertips together, considering Uzumaki Naruto was a variable he had been tracking for years. The boy, the man, now, was the village's most powerful combat asset outside of the Hokage himself, and he was entirely outside Danzo's control. He'd refused Anbu. He operated with an independence that Hiruzen indulged because the old man had a sentimental attachment to Minato's legacy. He was, in Danzo's assessment, a weapon without a hand on the trigger, and such weapons were inherently destabilizing. Now that weapon was spending regular, private time with the wife of the man who was leading the Uchiha toward insurrection. The possibilities branched before him like paths in a forest, and Danzo walked each one to its logical terminus. If the contact was romantic, and the intelligence suggested this was increasingly likely, it was a vulnerability. For both of them. For the Jinchuriki, whose loyalty to the village could be complicated by an attachment to a member of the hostile clan. For Mikoto, whose position within the Uchiha could be destroyed by exposure. For Fugaku, whose pride was a structural element of his authority and whose humiliation could accelerate the coup timeline in unpredictable ways, vulnerabilities were tools. The question was not whether to use them, but when and how. Danzo folded the report into a precise square and fed it to the small flame on his desk. The paper caught, curled, and became ash. "Sigh," he said. A figure materialized from the shadows by the door. Young, pale, expressionless, one of Danzo's most capable operatives, trained from childhood to observe, record, and act without emotion or hesitation. Increase surveillance on the eastern perimeter. I want eyes on both targets during any contact. Detailed accounts of conversation content, physical proximity, duration, and emotional effect. Do not intervene. Do not be detected. Understood. And pull the complete dossier on Uzumaki Naruto. Everything, mission history, psychological profile, social connections, medical records. I want to know him better than he knows himself. Sai bowed and disappeared. Danzo sat in the silence of his office and considered the board. The Uchiha coup was a crisis he'd been preparing for. This new development was unexpected, but unexpected was not the same as unwelcome. In his experience, the most effective leverage came from information that people believed was hidden. He had time. He would watch and he would wait, and when the moment came to act, he would have everything he needed. Thursday came, and the rain was gone, replaced by a sharp autumn clarity that made the world look freshly cut. Mikoto arrived at the river early, driven by an energy she was choosing not to examine, and spent 30 minutes running through advanced kata while waiting for a chakra signature she was choosing not to anticipate. He came late. Almost an hour late. She'd nearly given up, had actually picked up her basket and started toward the path when she felt him muffled, diminished, wrong. His chakra was there but quieter than usual, like a fire with something heavy thrown over it. He came through the trees moving slowly, and she saw why. His left arm was bound to his chest with a field wrap, and there was a bruise covering the entire right side of his jaw, and he was favoring his right leg in a way that suggested a deep muscle injury rather than a surface wound. What happened? Training accident. He lowered himself onto the bank with a grunt that he tried to turn into a casual exhale. Sparring with Guy-sensei got a little out of hand. Mato Guy did this. In his defense, I asked him to go full speed. In my defense, I didn't know full speed meant getting kicked through a cliff face. He tried to grin, but the bruise made it lopsided. I'm fine. The fox is handling the internal stuff. Arms just dislocated, popped it back in, but I'm letting it rest. She set the basket down and crossed to the bank and knelt next to him without making a conscious decision to do so. Her hands went to his arm, professional, clinical, the muscle memory of field medicine activating before her brain could raise objections. Hold still. Mikoto, it's fine. Your wrap is wrong. You've got the tension on the bicep instead of the shoulder. The joint will recede at the wrong angle if you leave it like this. She unwound the wrap with quick, certain fingers and felt the joint. The dislocation had been rough, there was swelling, and the surrounding tissue was hot with inflammation. She adjusted the arm's position, felt the joint seat more cleanly, and rewrapped it with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times in the field. He was quiet while she worked. She was close enough to feel the heat of his skin through the wrap, close enough to smell rain-damp fabric and something underneath that was warm and alive and distinctly him. Your hands are cold, he said. Your shoulder was out of socket. I think you can endure cold hands. I wasn't complaining. His voice had dropped half a register. She looked up from the wrap and found his face very close, his blue eyes on hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with the injury, her hands stilled on his arm. She didn't pull away, the moment suspended, fragile as glass. The river moved. A bird called from somewhere upstream. The afternoon light came through the branches in golden bars that striped the ground around them. She was kneeling in the dirt next to a man who was not her husband, with her hands on his body, and every rational part of her mind was screaming retreat, and every other part of her was absolutely still. Mikoto, he said, her name in his mouth again. Not a question this time, a statement, or maybe a request, or maybe just the sound of someone saying the truest thing they knew. She pulled her hands back. Slowly, deliberately, like withdrawing from a live wire. The wrap should hold for a day, See a medicnin for the inflammation." "I don't need a medicnin, I have a fox." "The fox heals damage, he doesn't optimize recovery. There's a difference. You sound like Sakura." Then Sakura is a smart woman. She sat back on her heels and created distance, not much, but enough to breathe. "You shouldn't have come here injured." "I wanted to see you." The directness hit her like a slap, not because it was unwelcome, but because it was so simply, cleanly honest that it bypassed every defense she had. "You can't say things like that." "Why not? It's true." "Because the truth isn't the point. The situation is the point." He shifted, turning to face her more fully despite the bound arm, and his expression was serious in a way that she'd seen only a few times. The seriousness underneath the grin, the real face behind the performance. "The situation," he said, "is that I've spent the last month coming to this river to see you, and every time I leave I count the hours until I can come back, and that's never happened to me before with anyone, and I think you feel the same way, and the situation is that we're both pretending we don't." "I'm not pretending." "I'm choosing." "Choosing what? My children, my responsibilities, the life I committed to, even if it isn't what I—" She stopped, drew a breath through her teeth. "You don't understand what's at stake. Then help me understand." If the clan found out, if Fugaku found out, it wouldn't just be scandal. It would be war. Inside the compound, and maybe outside it too, the Uchiha are a powder keg, Naruto. Fugaku is holding them together through pride and authority, and if that authority is undermined, if the clan head's wife is caught with— She pressed her lips together, unable to finish the sentence, because finishing it meant describing what they were, and she didn't have a word for it yet. "With a Jinchuriki," he said flatly. "With anyone. But yes, with you it's worse. You're the Nine-Tails vessel. The Uchiha blame the fox for their exile. You represent everything they resent about how this village has treated them." He was quiet for a long moment. The seriousness on his face deepened into something more complex, not hurt, not anger, but a heavy understanding. He looked at the river. "So I'm the worst possible person you could? Yes. And you still come here." She had no answer for that, none that wouldn't damn her. He reached out with his good hand and touched her wrist. Just that, his fingers on the thin skin where her pulse beat, light enough that she could have pulled away without effort. She didn't pull away. "I won't push," he said. "I need you to know that. Whatever this is, however far it goes or doesn't go, I'm not going to push. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't feel what I feel, because I spent my whole childhood pretending and it nearly killed me, and I promised myself I'd stop." His fingers on her wrist, her pulse against his fingertips. The river, the light, the sound of the world continuing around them as if nothing was changing when in fact everything was. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I hear you," he nodded, released her wrist. The absence of his touch was immediate and aching. They sat by the river for another hour. He told her about the spar with Guy, the real version, which was funnier and more chaotic than the abbreviated one, involving a destroyed training ground, 3 terrified genin who'd been using an adjacent field, and a cratered hillside that the village maintenance crew was going to be very unhappy about. She told him about Sasuke's latest obsession. He discovered that tomatoes could be eaten like apples, and was now consuming them at a rate that was starting to affect the household grocery budget. They didn't touch again. They didn't talk about feelings or situations or what they were. They just existed in the same space, and the space held them. And when she left, he watched her go. And when she was far enough away that she couldn't feel his chakra anymore, she stopped on the path and pressed her hand against her wrist where his fingers had been and stood very still for a long time. 2 weeks slid past like water over stone. They met 7 more times. The rhythm was irregular, deliberate, unpredictable, because Mikoto understood surveillance and knew that patterns were what got you caught. Different times, different days. Sometimes she arrived first, sometimes he did. Once they both arrived at exactly the same moment and stood at opposite ends of the clearing staring at each other, and then burst into laughter at the absurdity of their own caution. They trained together. This became the architecture of their meetings. a framework that was both genuine and convenient, because training was a defensible explanation for their river visits if anyone asked. And because the physical work gave them something to do with the tension that was building between them like pressure in a sealed container. She taught him fire-style refinement, shape manipulation, the principles of combined element compression. He taught her wind techniques, unconventional chakra application, the wild improvisational combat style he'd developed that was equal parts genius and insanity. They sparred, carefully at first and then less carefully, and discovered that their fighting styles interlocked in unexpected ways, her precision covering his recklessness, his power amplifying her technique. After one particularly intense session, she'd pinned him to the ground with a kunai at his throat and a fire-style technique glowing at her fingertips, and he'd looked up at her with his chest heaving and his eyes bright and said, "You'd have been the best Jonin in the village." "I know." She said and meant it, and the saying of it, the admission, out loud of her own lost potential, cracked something open in her chest that had been sealed for 10 years. She climbed off him and sat on the grass and didn't cry, but only barely. He sat next to her and didn't say anything. Just sat. And after a while, she leaned into him, her shoulder against his, the smallest physical contact, the barest crossing of the line, and he leaned back. And they stayed like that while the light changed and the river ran and neither of them spoke. It was the shoulder touch that broke her. Not the conversations, not the vulnerability, not the charged looks or the hand on her wrist. The shoulder. The simple, undemanding weight of another person's body against hers, the warmth of it, the solidity. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched by someone who wasn't asking anything from her. Not food, not comfort, not obedience, not performance. Just contact. Just here I am, next to you, and I'm not going anywhere. She went home that evening and cooked dinner, and helped Sasuke with his shuriken practice in the courtyard, and spoke to Itachi about his upcoming mission, and sat across from Fugaku at the table in silence, and felt, beneath the surface of her daily life, a tectonic shift that was rearranging everything. The kiss happened on a Tuesday. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't planned any of this. That was the terrifying part, the loss of control that was antithetical to everything she'd been trained to be. She was an Uchiha Kunoichi. She planned. She calculated. She controlled. But control, it turned out, had limits, and hers had been eroding for weeks. They'd been sparring. A real spar, full speed, the kind that left bruises and burned chakra and required the total engagement of mind and body. She'd caught him with a feint she'd developed during her Anbu track days, a genjutsu-laced body flicker that created a half-second opening, and used it to sweep his legs and drive him into the shallows. He'd recovered mid-fall, twisted, caught her arm, and pulled her down with him. They hit the water in a tangle of limbs, and when they surfaced, gasping, she was pressed against him with one hand braced on his chest, and the river rushing around them and his face inches from hers. She kissed him. It wasn't tentative or questioning or gentle. It was the kiss of a woman who'd been starving for something she couldn't name and had finally stopped pretending she wasn't hungry. She kissed him, and his good arm came around her waist, and his mouth opened against hers, and the river was cold but his body was warm and the contrast was overwhelming, and she heard herself make a sound against his lips that she didn't recognize, something raw and aching and relieved. Like a breath held too long finally released, they broke apart. The water moved around them, his eyes were wide, his breathing ragged, his hand still on her waist like he'd forgotten it was there. "Mikoto," she pressed her forehead against his, closed her eyes. "Let the river hold them both." "Don't," she said. "Don't say anything rational, not yet. Give me 1 minute where I don't have to be reasonable." He was quiet, his breath against her face, warm in the cold air, his heartbeat under her palm, fast and hard and real. The minute passed. She opened her eyes. "I shouldn't have done that." She said, "I know. It can't happen again. Okay." She looked at him, really looked, with the full weight of her intelligence and her training and her heart, and saw that he was telling the truth and lying at the same time, the way you do when you agree to something impossible, because the alternative is losing the person in front of you. He would accept whatever boundary she set. He would also ache every time he was near her, and she would know, and it would be its own kind of cruelty. She kissed him again. This time it was slow. This time she felt every part of it, the texture of his mouth, the way his hand tightened on her waist, the sound he made in the back of his throat when she deepened the kiss. She memorized it, because some part of her knew she was crossing a threshold she couldn't cross back over. And if this was the beginning of something that would destroy her life, she wanted to remember exactly how it started. They stood in the river for a long time, kissing like the world outside the water didn't exist. When they finally separated, the afternoon had gone gold to amber, and the air had cooled, and reality was waiting on the bank like a patient predator. She pressed her hand against his chest one final time, feeling his heartbeat slow. "This changes everything. I know. I need to think. Take whatever time you need." She climbed out of the river. Her clothes were soaked, her hair was dripping, and she was going to have to explain the state of herself when she got home. Training, she'd say, fell in the river. Mikoto, who hadn't slipped on a wet surface since she was 12, but she'd make it work because making things work was what she did. She looked back at him from the bank. He was still standing in the shallows, water swirling around his knees, watching her with an expression that contained everything he was keeping himself from saying. "Tuesday," she said, even though it was already Tuesday, and what she meant was next Tuesday, and what she really meant was "I'll come back." "Tuesday," he said. She walked home through the trees with her heart slamming against her ribs and her lips burning and the taste of him in her mouth. And the compound gate loomed ahead of her like the entrance to a cage. And she walked through it and became Uchiha Mikoto, clan head's wife, mother of 2. And the river faded behind her, but the heat of it didn't. And when she lay in bed that night, she could still feel the ghost of his hand on her waist, and she pressed her face into the pillow and shook with something that was equal parts joy and terror. She didn't go on Tuesday, or Wednesday, or Thursday. She stayed in the compound and cooked and cleaned and trained alone in the small courtyard, and sat with Sasuke while he practiced his academy kata and smiled at Fugaku when he came home, and existed inside her life like a woman in a painting, visible, composed, perfectly still. On Friday, Itachi cornered her. He didn't do it obviously. He was never obvious. He simply appeared in the kitchen while she was preparing dinner, sat at the table and watched her with those dark eyes that missed nothing. "You stopped going to the river," he said. She set the knife down carefully. "I didn't know you were tracking my movements." "I'm not. I noticed the pattern and then I noticed the break in it. I've been busy. You've been avoiding something." She turned to face him. Her 10-year-old son, with his chin-length hair and his Anbu-level perception, and his small, serious face that held more weight than any child's should. She wanted to lie to him. She wanted to protect him from the mess she was making. But lying to Itachi was functionally impossible. He would see it, and the seeing would hurt him more than the truth. "I'm working through something," she said. "A personal decision. I need time." He studied her for a long moment. "Is it dangerous?" The question landed like a senbon, thin, precise, targeted. He wasn't asking about physical danger. He was asking about the kind of danger that lived inside choices, the kind that could reshape a family's architecture. "It might be," she said honestly. He nodded slowly. She saw him file the information, weigh it, assign it a priority level. He was building a picture, she realized. Not just of what she was doing, but of how it fit into the larger patterns he was tracking, the clan, the village, the shifting web of tensions that he navigated with a precision that broke her heart. "Be careful, mother," he said, and the way he said it was nothing like the way Fugaku said it. Fugaku meant don't draw attention. Itachi meant don't get hurt. "I will." He helped her finish dinner. They worked in comfortable silence, and she watched his small, capable hands slice vegetables with the same economy of motion he applied to everything. And she thought about what she was doing and who it would affect, and whether any amount of personal happiness was worth the risk to the boy standing next to her. She didn't have an answer. On Saturday, she went back to the river. He was there. She hadn't told him she was coming, and he hadn't waited all week. He had a life, missions, obligations, but he was there, training alone, working through the shape manipulation she'd taught him. His form had improved. The fire held for 2 full seconds now. He felt her chakra and turned, and his face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: surprise, relief, uncertainty, hunger, before settling on something carefully neutral. Hey. Hey. They stood on opposite sides of the clearing, 10 meters apart, and the distance felt enormous and meaningless at the same time. "I've been thinking," she said. "Yeah, about what I said, about it not happening again." Yeah, she crossed the clearing, not running, not hesitating. Walking with the same purposeful stride she used on missions, when the decision was made and the only thing left was execution. She stopped in front of him, close enough to touch, and looked up into his face because he was taller now. When had he gotten taller? Or had she just never stood this close, and the blue of his eyes was the color of the sky and the river and nothing else? "I lied," she said. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and this time there was no river between them, no shock to interrupt, no minute of unreasonableness to be rationed. This time it was a choice, clear-eyed and deliberate, and she made it with the full knowledge of what it would cost and the full acceptance that some hungers, denied long enough, become their own kind of death. They didn't go further. Not then. The kiss was enough to shatter the pretense, and the shattering required its own aftermath. They sat on the rocks and talked, really talked about what this was and what they were doing and the impossible arithmetic of their situation. "I can't leave him," she said. "Not now. The clan is too unstable. If I left, it would be a fracture that Fugaku couldn't survive politically and the fallout. I'm not asking you to leave." "Then what are you asking?" He took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "I'm asking for whatever you can give." "I know that sounds. I know it's not fair to either of us. But I've lived my whole life taking what I could get and making it enough, and you're the first thing that's ever felt like more than enough, and I'm not ready to lose that. You deserve more than scraps. Don't tell me what I deserve. Let me decide." She tightened her grip on his hand and felt the calluses on his palm from years of training and fighting and holding on to things. And she thought about Kushina, who had loved Minato with a completeness that was almost embarrassing to be around. And she thought about how unfair it was that Kushina's son was sitting here, choosing to love a woman who could only give him stolen hours by a river, and how Kushina would have been furious and heartbroken and understanding all at once. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They sat by the river until the light died, and when she left, he walked with her to the edge of the tree line, and they stood in the last of the dusk, and he kissed her forehead. Gently, reverently. Like she was something sacred, and she touched his face and felt the whisker marks on his cheeks under her fingertips and smiled. And the smile was the realest thing she'd worn in years. October became November, and the stolen hours accumulated like leaves. They were careful. Mikoto imposed operational security with the rigor of a former intelligence operative, varying their meeting times, using different approaches to the river, maintaining a plausible civilian routine that could account for her absences. Naruto, who'd spent his childhood evading Anbu for pranks, adapted to the secrecy with a facility that surprised them both. They trained. They talked. They kissed in the spaces between, and the kissing evolved into something more. Not all at once. Not in a single dramatic escalation, but in the gradual, inevitable way that intimacy deepens when two people stop holding parts of themselves back. The first time they made love was in November, on a cold evening when the sun set early, and the forest was quilted in orange and gold. She'd come to the river expecting to train, and he'd been there with a blanket he'd brought from his apartment, and when she'd asked what it was for, he'd said, "In case you're cold," with an earnestness that was so transparent and so sweet that she'd laughed, really laughed, the kind that made her stomach hurt, the kind she hadn't made since Kushina, and pulled him down to the ground. It was not the frenzied collision of two people overcome by passion. It was slow and nervous, and punctuated by moments of awkwardness that they navigated together, his elbow on her hair, her knee in an unfortunate location, A moment where they both tried to move in the same direction and bumped noses and started laughing again. It was human. It was real. And when it was over, they lay on the blanket with the cold air on their skin and the canopy of trees above them like a cathedral ceiling, and she felt something that she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name. Whole. She felt whole. It lasted until she got home, and then the guilt hit her like a wall. She stood in the shower with the water scalding hot and scrubbed her skin until it was red and pressed her forehead against the tile and breathed through the panic that was tightening around her chest like a fist. She had done this. She had chosen this. She had betrayed her husband and her vows and the clan she was born into, and she'd done it with her eyes open and her heart willing, and the fact that it had felt like homecoming didn't make it less of a betrayal. She dried herself. She dressed. She made dinner. She sat across from Fugaku and ate in silence and looked at his face, the hard jaw, the stern mouth, the eyes that saw everything except the things that mattered. And she felt the guilt and the grief and the anger all braided together into something she couldn't separate. She'd loved him once, or she'd thought she had. Maybe what she'd felt had been duty wearing love's clothing, the way so many arranged marriages functioned, proximity and shared purpose mistaken for genuine connection. She'd been 18 when they married. She'd been a girl. She'd been told this was how it was done, and she'd done it, and she'd tried, and the trying had consumed her 20s and most of her 30s, and it hadn't been enough. It wasn't enough for him either. She knew that. Fugaku's disappointments were different from hers, political, structural, focused outward, but they were no less consuming. He'd wanted a wife who would be a symbol, a pillar, an embodiment of Uchiha propriety, and she'd given him that, and it had hollowed them both out. None of this excused what she'd done. She knew that too, but she was going to do it again. Weeks passed. The affair settled into a rhythm that was terrifying in its normalcy. They met, they trained, they made love. They lay together in the brief aftermath and talked about everything except the future, because the future was a country neither of them had a map to. Naruto told her about the fox, really told her, not the sanitized version he gave most people. He told her about the seal space, the cage, the enormous presence behind the bars that was equal parts malice and ancient intelligence. He told her about the conversations he had with the Nine Tails, grudging, hostile, gradually evolving into something that wasn't friendship, but was maybe the beginning of mutual recognition. "He knows about you," Naruto said one afternoon. They were lying on the blanket, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair. "He can feel what I feel. He thinks I'm an idiot." What does he say? Mostly variations of the kit is going to get himself killed. He has a limited vocabulary for emotional situations. He's not wrong about the danger. He's not wrong about a lot of things. He's just a jerk about it. She told him about her childhood. The rigidity of Uchiha upbringing, the pressure to awaken the Sharingan early. The day she'd activated hers at age 8 during a training accident when a fire technique reflected off a water surface and came back at her face. She told him about her mother, who'd been gentle and quiet and had died on a mission when Mikoto was 12, and her father, who'd been hard and proud and had selected Fugaku as her husband with the precision of a man choosing a weapons loadout. "Did you fight it?" Naruto asked. "The marriage." "I considered it, for about 3 hours. Then my father explained what would happen to my standing, my career, and my family's position within the clan if I refused, and I understood that fighting wasn't an option. It was a transaction. I was the currency." His arm tightened around her. She felt his jaw clench against the top of her head. That's how it works. In the Uchiha, in most clans, love is a luxury, duty is the foundation. And now I'm lying in the woods with a Jinchuriki, having committed adultery, and the foundation is cracking. She said it lightly, but the truth of it pressed down on her. "I don't regret it. I should, but I don't." He kissed the top of her head. "I don't either." The first sign of trouble came not from the Uchiha, but from the Hokage's office. Naruto was summoned on a Thursday morning, which was unusual. His mission assignments typically came through the regular dispatch, not through direct summons. He walked into the office and found Hiruzen standing at the window, pipe unlit, staring out at the village with the expression of a man watching something he loved begin to burn. "Sit down, Naruto." He sat. The third didn't turn from the window. "How well do you know the Uchiha district?" "Not well." "I don't go in there, but you go near it." Naruto's stomach tightened. "If this is about the river, it's about the river, and the woman you meet there." Hiruzen turned, and his face was lined and weary and carried a gravity that Naruto hadn't seen since the last time they'd discussed the Nine Tails. "I've been patient, Naruto. I've hoped that this was a phase, a friendship, something that would run its course. But my intelligence tells me it has not run its course. It has deepened. Your intelligence. I am the Hokage. I have intelligence about many things I wish I didn't." Naruto gripped the arms of the chair. "Are you having me followed? I am not. But others are, and that is the problem." Hiruzen sat down behind his desk slowly, like the act of sitting required more energy than he had. "Danzo knows." The name hit Naruto like ice water. "He hasn't acted yet," Hiruzen continued, "but he will. Danzo collects leverage the way other men collect debts, and what you and Mikoto are doing is leverage of the highest order. Against you, against her, against the Uchiha, against me. He will use it when the moment serves him. Use it how? I don't know. That's what frightens me. Danzo's methods are not transparent." Hiruzen's hands folded on the desk, and his old fingers were steady, which meant he was forcing them to be. "Naruto, I care about you. You know this. You are Minato and Kushina's legacy, and I have failed you in more ways than I can count, and I am trying in my imperfect, inadequate way to not fail you now. So I am asking you, clearly and directly, end this, before it becomes a weapon." Naruto sat in the chair and felt the world rearrange itself around a new axis of fear. Not fear for himself. He'd spent his whole life as a target, and the concept of personal danger barely registered anymore. Fear for her. "And if I don't?" Hiruzen's eyes were sad. "Then I cannot protect either of you from what comes next." Naruto stood. He didn't trust himself to say anything measured, so he said nothing. He walked to the door. "Naruto," he stopped. "She is not free. Whatever you feel, whatever she feels, she is not free, and pursuing this will not free her. It will cage you both." He left the office and walked through the village with the old man's words ringing in his ears and Danzo's name crawling across his skin like something cold and many-legged. That evening, he went to the river. She was there, sitting on the rocks, waiting for him, and the sight of her, calm, beautiful, unaware of what he'd just learned, made his chest constrict so tightly he couldn't breathe for a moment. He told her everything. He owed her that. She listened without interrupting. Her face went still, not composed but locked, the way it went when she was processing something that required the full weight of her intelligence. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Danzo," she said finally. "Yeah, he'll sit on it. He's patient. He'll wait until the information has maximum destructive potential, and then he'll deploy it at the precise moment that serves his agenda. Which is control. It's always control with Danzo. He wants the Uchiha neutralized. He wants the Jinchuriki under his authority. He wants the third replaced with someone more amenable to his methods. This," she gestured between them, "gives him ammunition for all three." Naruto stared at her. "You know more actions. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 3. A seed in stone. The confirmation came on a Wednesday, in a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and old paper, 3 blocks from the commercial district, in a part of Konoha that no Uchiha had reason to visit. Mikoto had chosen the clinic with the same care she'd once applied to selecting extraction routes. It was small, civilian-run, staffed by a single medic nin named Tsubaki, who'd retired from active duty after losing her left hand in the Third Shinobi War. Tsubaki operated on a cash-only basis, kept minimal records, and owed Mikoto a debt that was 17 years old and had never been called in. Until now, the examination room was cramped. A single cot, a curtain, a shelf of supplies. Tsubaki's remaining hand glowed green over Mikoto's abdomen, her weathered face unreadable as she worked. She was in her 60s, heavyset, with cropped gray hair and the unflappable demeanor of a woman who'd spent decades elbow-deep in other people's crises. 6 weeks, Tsubaki said. She withdrew her hand and the green glow faded. Healthy implantation. Strong chakra signature already, stronger than usual for this stage, actually. Mikoto stared at the ceiling. 6 weeks. That tracked with November. With the blanket in the forest and the orange gold leaves and the first time she'd felt whole in years. The father, Tsubaki said, not quite a question, is not my husband. Tsubaki's expression didn't change. She'd been a field medic for 20 years. She'd seen worse. Does the father know? Not yet. Does anyone know? You and me. Tsubaki pulled a stool close and sat down with the heaviness of a woman whose knees had been complaining for a decade. She looked at Mikoto with eyes that held neither judgment nor sympathy, just the flat assessment of a professional calculating variables. You came to me for a reason. Not just the exam. You could have done this yourself. You trained in field diagnostics. You know enough medical ninjutsu to confirm a pregnancy. You came because you need something. Mikoto sat up on the cot. I need to hide it. For how long? As long as possible. Ideally, until I can arrange circumstances that explain the child's existence without revealing its parentage. Mikoto, you're the wife of the Uchiha clan head. You live in a compound full of people with enhanced perception. Your husband has the Sharingan. Your elder son is how old now? 10. And already a prodigy from what I hear. You want to hide a pregnancy from these people. Tsubaki's voice was dry. For how long? The full term if I can manage it. Tsubaki was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Mikoto the way you look at a map that shows a path through territory you know is mined. There are techniques, she said slowly. Medical ninjutsu applications that can suppress the physical indicators. Chakra-based body modification, subtle, not dramatic. It's not standard practice because the demand is niche. But the theory is sound, and I've seen variants used in deep cover infiltration missions where female operatives needed to maintain cover during pregnancies. I know, I've used one of them. Tsubaki's eyebrows rose. You've. Not for a pregnancy. For a mission, long-term infiltration in the land of Earth 7 years ago. I used a chakra compression technique to alter my physical appearance for 3 months. Different context, same principle. She met Tsubaki's eyes. I need you to help me adapt it. The technique I used was designed for surface-level changes, facial features, body shape. This is deeper. I need to suppress the visible progression of the pregnancy without affecting the child's development. Concealment without harm. That's a razor's edge. If the compression technique interferes with the fetal chakra system, which is why I need you, you understand fetal development at a level I don't. I know concealment. You know the medicine. Together, we can design something that works. Tsubaki stood and walked to the window, staring out at the narrow street below. A woman was sweeping the sidewalk. A cat was sleeping on a fence post. Normal life, continuing its normal patterns. What you're asking me to do, Tsubaki said without turning around, is help you deceive your husband and your clan about a pregnancy that, if discovered, would result in consequences I don't want to think about, for both of us. Yes, the debt I owe you isn't why I'm asking. You don't owe me enough for this. No one does. I'm asking because you're the only person in this village who has the skill, the discretion, and the distance from both the Uchiha and the Hokage's office to help me. If you say no, I'll walk out and find another way. I won't hold it against you. Tsubaki turned from the window. She looked old in the gray light, the lines on her face deep carved and the stump of her left wrist visible below her rolled sleeve. She'd lost the hand saving 3 genin during the Battle of Kenabe Bridge. Mikoto knew because she'd been the one who'd carried the genin to safety while Tsubaki held off 2 Iwachunin with one hand and a scalpel. Every other week, Tsubaki said. You come here for monitoring. We adjust the technique as the pregnancy progresses. If at any point I determine the child is at risk, we stop non-negotiable, and you tell the father, he deserves to know. I will in my own time. Soon, Mikoto, he deserves to know soon. She left the clinic through the back entrance and took a circuitous route home. stopping at 2 markets and a fabric shop to create a plausible trail for her absence. The morning was bright and cold. She walked through Konoha's streets and felt the secret inside her like a coal, hot, contained, dangerous. 6 weeks. A seed in stone. Growing in the dark, in the silence, in the space between what was true and what was shown. She pressed her hand against her stomach through her coat and thought, with a clarity that cut like wire, I will protect you, whatever it costs. Telling Naruto was supposed to happen at the river, at their place, in the context that had become their private world. She'd planned it, the words, the setting, the careful management of his reaction. She'd rehearsed it in her head while washing dishes, while folding laundry, while lying awake next to Fugaku's sleeping back. None of the rehearsals prepared her for the reality, which was that when she arrived at the river on Saturday, he was already there, sitting on the rocks with his feet in the water, and he looked up at her with that open, unguarded smile that he only wore in this place. And every rehearsed word evaporated. She sat down next to him. The river was low today, winter-thinned, running slow over the stones. The trees were mostly bare, their branches like cracks in the gray sky. You look serious, he said. I'm always serious. No, you're always composed. There's a difference. Serious is what you look like when something's actually wrong. He turned to face her, smile fading. What's wrong? She looked at the water. A leaf was caught in the current, spinning in a slow circle between 2 rocks, going nowhere. I'm pregnant. The word hit the air and lay there. She felt him go still beside her, not the controlled stillness of a shinobi, but the involuntary freeze of a person whose brain has just received information it doesn't know how to process. Silence. The river. A bird somewhere. The leaf spinning. You're. He stopped, started again. When? 6 weeks. November. She watched his face, and what she saw there was not what she'd expected. She'd prepared for shock, for fear, for the panicked scramble of a young man confronted with consequences he hadn't considered. What she got was stillness, followed by something that moved across his features like weather, disbelief, then understanding, then a wave of emotion so large and so complex that it defied a single name his hand found hers. His grip was tight, almost painful. Naruto? Is it, are you sure? I'm sure. I had it confirmed by a medic I trust. And the baby is the baby, healthy. Strong. The medic said the chakra signature is unusually strong for this early. He made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something between the two, raw and broken and joyful in a way that didn't match the horror of their situation. His hand tightened on hers, and when she looked at him, his eyes were wet. I'm going to be a father. Naruto, listen to me. I'm going to be a father. He said it like he was tasting the word, testing its reality against his tongue. And she saw, in that moment, the thing she should have anticipated but hadn't. For a man who'd grown up without parents, without family, without anyone who shared his blood, the idea of a child, his child, was not a crisis. It was a miracle. This is dangerous. She said, because someone had to say it, because the joy on his face was going to kill her if she let it in without a counterweight. This is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to either of us. If Fugaku finds out, if Danzo finds out, I know. Do you? Because you're sitting there looking like someone just gave you a gift, and I need you to understand that this gift comes attached to a bomb. He turned to her, and the joy was still there, but it had been joined by something harder, sharper, the same steel she'd seen in him during their strategic conversations, the intelligence beneath the warmth. I understand. I understand that my child is growing inside you in a house full of people who would destroy us if they knew. I understand that the most dangerous man in Konoha is already watching us. I understand that we're trapped between a clan that's planning a coup and a village that's planning to stop them, and our baby is caught in the middle. He took a breath. I understand all of it, and I'm still glad. How can you be glad? Because I've spent my entire life alone. Because every person I'm connected to is connected to me by duty or assignment or circumstance. And this, he pressed his free hand against her stomach gently, like he was afraid of disturbing something sacred. This is the first thing that's mine. That came from love. From us. His voice cracked on the last word, and he didn't try to fix it. Tell me that's not worth being glad about. She couldn't. Because underneath the fear and the calculation and the crushing weight of consequence, she felt it too, the gladness, fierce and private and ungovernable. A life. Their life. A child made from the collision of Uzumaki fire and Uchiha shadow, from stolen hours and river water and the reckless, beautiful refusal to keep holding still. She put her hand over his on her stomach. We have to be smart about this, she said. Smarter than we've been about anything? Okay. Tell me the plan, she told him. Tsubaki, the concealment technique, the monitoring schedule, the cover story she was already constructing. She laid it out with the precision of a mission briefing, and he listened with the focus of a shinobi absorbing an operational plan. And between the clinical details, they were holding hands over the place where their child was growing, and the contradiction of that, strategy and tenderness. Fear and love, war planning and parenthood was the truest thing about them. The hardest part will be the first 3 months, she said. Morning sickness, fatigue, the hormonal changes. I can manage most of it with chakra control, but there will be bad days. I need you to not come looking for me on those days. Mikoto, if I miss the river, it means I'm managing something, not that something's gone wrong. You have to trust me to handle it. I trust you, but if something does go wrong, then I'll send word through Tsubaki. She'll contact you at a dead-drop location I'll set up this week. She saw his expression and added, I've done this before. Not the pregnancy part, but operational security, covert communication. This is what I was trained for. You were trained to hide a baby from the Sharingan. I was trained to hide anything from anyone. The Sharingan is just another detection method. It reads chakra. If I can regulate my chakra output to mask the secondary signature, the pregnancy won't be detectable through visual means. The physical changes are what the concealment technique handles. He shook his head slowly, and despite everything, he was almost smiling. You're terrifying, you know that. Good. Terrifying is what's going to keep us alive. They stayed at the river until the cold drove them inside being relative, since neither of them had any interior space they could share. They walked together along the path until it forked, and at the fork they stopped. I want to be there, he said. For the appointments. For the milestones. I know I can't, but I want you to know that I want to. I know. And when the baby comes, we'll figure that out, one crisis at a time. He kissed her, long, slow, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that was at odds with the calloused roughness of his palms. When he pulled back, his blue eyes were steady. I love you, he said. I should have said it before now. I've been thinking it for weeks. I love you and I love this baby and I'm going to protect you both. That's not a promise, it's a fact. She pressed her forehead against his. I love you too. And that's the most dangerous sentence I've ever said. They parted. She walked toward the compound. He walked toward the village. The fork in the path divided them like a blade. The morning sickness was brutal. It hit like clockwork, 5 a.m., every morning for 3 weeks straight. Mikoto would snap awake to the nausea already cresting, swing her legs out of bed with controlled urgency, and make it to the bathroom with seconds to spare. The trick was silence. Fugaku slept lightly. Any disruption to the household's routine registered in his awareness like a tripwire. She learned to vomit quietly. It was, she reflected during one particularly awful morning with her face over the toilet and her hand braced against the wall, perhaps the least dignified skill she'd ever developed. The chakra management was exhausting. She maintained a constant, low-level suppression field around her abdomen, smoothing the secondary chakra signature that the growing fetus was already producing. It drew on her reserves continuously, which compounded the fatigue that pregnancy was already causing. By the 3rd week, she was operating on willpower and the deep stubbornness that had carried her through every hard thing she'd ever done, Sasuke noticed. Mama, you look tired. I'm fine, sweetheart. I didn't sleep well. You always don't sleep well. Are you sick? No, just busy. He accepted this with the uncritical trust of a 5-year-old, but his dark eyes lingered on her face, and she saw the concern in them, raw and genuine in a way that only a child's concern could be. She pulled him into a hug, partly for his comfort and partly for hers, and he squirmed against her with the affectionate resistance of a boy who was beginning to think he was too old for hugs but wasn't quite ready to give them up. "Can we have tomatoes for dinner? We had tomatoes yesterday. Can we have them again?" "Yes, Sasuke, we can have them again." He grinned and ran off to practice his shuriken throws in the courtyard, and she leaned against the kitchen counter and pressed her hand against her stomach and breathed through a wave of nausea that crested and receded like a tide. Itachi was the one she worried about most. Fugaku was distracted. The clan meetings were consuming him, the political machinations with the village council. The slow, grinding progression toward something that Mikoto could feel but not see. He came home late, left early, occupied a parallel existence in the same house without truly intersecting with hers. His inattention was, for the first time in their marriage, a gift, but Itachi was not distracted. Itachi was never distracted. And he was watching her with an intensity that had shifted from his usual background observation to something more focused, more deliberate. He didn't ask questions. That was worse. Questions she could deflect. Silence she could not. It came to a head on a Wednesday evening. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner: miso soup, grilled fish, rice, and tomatoes for Sasuke because she'd promised. And the smell of the fish triggered a wave of nausea so sudden and so violent that she had to grip the counter and close her eyes and fight it back with every scrap of control she possessed. When she opened her eyes, Itachi was standing in the doorway. He'd moved without sound, which was normal for him, but the fact that he'd come to the kitchen at all was unusual. He typically stayed in his room or in the small training space behind the house until dinner was ready. He was standing very still, his dark eyes on her face, and his expression held something she couldn't immediately identify. "The fish is burning," he said. She turned to the grill and rescued the mackerel, which was singed but salvageable. Her hands were steady. Her stomach was not. "Thank you." He didn't leave. He stood in the doorway and watched her work, and the watching had the quality of a puzzle being assembled, pieces being tried and discarded, connections being tested. "You're suppressing something," he said. She turned. "What?" "Your chakra. There's a suppression field around your midsection. It's subtle, most sensors wouldn't catch it, but I can see the interference pattern when I look closely." Her blood went cold. She held her face absolutely still. "I'm using a chakra control exercise," she said. "Localized compression. It's a training technique I'm revisiting." Itachi tilted his head. The gesture was small, almost bird-like. He was assessing the explanation, weighing it against what he observed, and she could see the calculus happening behind his eyes in real time. "The exercise requires maintaining the field continuously, even while cooking. I'm working on sustained application. It's a stamina drill. It coincides with your recent fatigue and the fact that you've been ill in the mornings." The kitchen was very quiet. The fish sizzled on the grill. Outside, Sasuke was throwing shuriken at the wooden target in the courtyard, and the rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk punctuated the silence like a heartbeat. "Itachi," she said carefully, "what are you asking me?" He looked at her for a long moment. His face was composed, controlled, the mask he wore for the world, but his eyes, her eyes in his face, held something that cracked through the surface. Worry. Not the analytical worry of a prodigy assessing data, but the raw, unfiltered worry of a boy who loved his mother and knew she was hiding something. "I'm asking if you're okay," he said. The simple honesty of it nearly broke her. She crossed the kitchen and knelt in front of him, which put them at eye level, and she took his face in her hands, this small, serious, impossibly burdened face, and she looked at him with everything she had. "I am okay," she said. "I promise you. What I'm going through is difficult, but it's not dangerous, and I am handling it. Can you trust me on that?" He searched her face. She let him. She dropped every defense and let her 10-year-old son read her the way he read everything, deeply, thoroughly, with an intelligence that was both his greatest gift and his heaviest chain. "Okay," he said finally. "I trust you." She kissed his forehead. "Thank you." He helped her finish dinner. They didn't speak about it again. But she saw him, later that evening, sitting on the Ngawa with his legs dangling over the edge, staring at the courtyard with an expression that told her he'd filed the information and would revisit it. And the knowledge that her son was tracking her secret was a weight she added to the others she carried. The weeks ground forward. Tsubaki's concealment technique worked. It was an elegant piece of medical ninjutsu, a layered chakra application that suppressed the physical indicators of pregnancy by redistributing the body's response to hormonal changes. It didn't eliminate the symptoms, it masked them, channeling the visible effects into areas that were less detectable. The nausea persisted, but became manageable. The fatigue leveled off as her body adjusted. The physical changes, the ones that would eventually make concealment impossible without the technique, were held in check, her body maintaining its pre-pregnancy appearance at the cost of a continuous chakra drain that Mikoto absorbed through iron discipline and a lot of tea. Every other week, she visited Tsubaki's clinic. The visits were tense, clinical affairs, Tsubaki monitoring the fetal development with her glowing hand, adjusting the technique's parameters, checking for any signs of harm to the child. "The baby's fine," Tsubaki said at the 8-week check. "Growing fast. Chakra network is developing ahead of schedule, significantly ahead. I've never seen prenatal chakra density like this. The father is a Jinchuriki." Tsubaki's hand paused on Mikoto's abdomen. She looked up. "You didn't mention that. I'm mentioning it now." Tsubaki absorbed this with the professional calm of a woman who decided, apparently, that nothing about this situation could surprise her anymore. "That explains the density. The nine-tails chakra is influencing the fetal development, not directly, but through the father's genetic signature. The child's chakra system is building with more capacity than normal. Is that dangerous? Not inherently, but it means the baby will have an unusually strong presence. When the chakra network activates fully 3rd trimester, typically, it's going to be harder to mask. The suppression field you're maintaining might not be sufficient. Then we'll strengthen it. There are limits, Mikoto. The technique draws on your reserves. You're already running a deficit. If we increase the suppression, then I'll manage. I'll supplement with soldier pills if I have to." Tsubaki gave her a look. "Soldier pills during pregnancy are a last resort. I know, but I need options, Tsubaki. Give me options, and I'll choose the least terrible one." Tsubaki sighed and made notes on a piece of paper that she would burn after the appointment. "I'll design a modified suppression seal, something you can wear on your body, a seal tag hidden that handles part of the load so your active chakra expenditure is reduced. It won't be as responsive as active suppression, but it will free up your reserves. How long to develop it? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Make it 2. She left the clinic and walked home through streets that were starting to frost with early winter. The cold bit at her cheeks, and she pulled her coat tighter and felt, beneath the layers of fabric and concealment and deception, the tiny warmth of the life growing inside her, and the contrast between the external cold and the internal heat was so sharp, it almost made her gasp. Naruto was going out of his mind. He couldn't be there. He couldn't attend the appointments, couldn't monitor the pregnancy, couldn't hold her hand through the morning sickness or help her manage the exhaustion. He couldn't do any of the things that a father should do, and the helplessness was a kind of torture that no amount of training or combat experience had prepared him for. He threw himself into missions with a ferocity that alarmed his mission partners and his command chain. He took every available assignment, B rank, A rank, anything that would burn off the energy that was building inside him like steam in a sealed container. He trained with Guy until the training grounds looked like a disaster zone. He sat in his apartment at night and stared at the ceiling and thought about a baby the size of a plum growing in secret inside a woman he loved in a house full of people who would kill them both if they knew. The dead drop was a hollow in a tree at the river's edge, covered by a removable section of bark. Mikoto left coded messages there, brief, utilitarian, stripped of anything personal because operational security didn't allow for tenderness. Appointment clear, growth normal, Technique holding. He read them and burned them and went home and lay on his back on his thin mattress and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw sparks. Kakashi found him on one of these nights. Not by accident. Kakashi didn't do anything by accident. He simply appeared on Naruto's windowsill, one eye visible above his mask, a paperback book in his left hand, radiating the aggressively casual energy of a man who decided to have a serious conversation and was going to pretend otherwise until the last possible moment. Yo, Kakashi-sensei. It's midnight. Is it? I lose track. He swung through the window and landed on the floor with the silent grace of someone who'd spent years in Anbu. You look terrible. Thanks. No, seriously, you look like you haven't slept in a week. Your mission output has tripled. You're training with Guy at intensities that are concerning even by Guy standards. Kakashi tucked the book into his vest and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So, what's going on? Nothing. Kakashi's visible eye regarded him with the flat patience of a man who'd been lied to by better liars. Naruto. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're spiraling. I've seen spiraling, I've done spiraling, and this is textbook. The overwork, the sleeplessness, the controlled recklessness. Something is eating you, and you're trying to outrun it. Naruto sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands. The knuckles were scraped raw from training, and there was a burned scar on his right palm from a fire technique he'd pushed too hard. He thought about telling Kakashi. He thought about how good it would feel to share the weight, to have one person in the world who knew, who could look at him and understand. But Kakashi was loyal to the Hokage. Kakashi was loyal to the village. And the Hokage had already told Naruto to end it, and this was no longer just an affair that could be ended. This was a child, and the child changed everything. I'm working through something, he said, borrowing Mikoto's phrase. It's personal, I'm handling it. Kakashi studied him. The silence stretched. Your father, Kakashi said quietly, used to get the same look when he was carrying something too heavy to share. He'd try to shoulder it alone, and it would eat him from the inside, and by the time he asked for help, the situation had usually gotten much worse than it needed to be. Kakashi-sensei, I'm not asking you to tell me. I'm asking you to remember that carrying things alone is not the same as being strong. Sometimes it's just being stubborn. He pushed off the wall and moved toward the window. I'm here. Whenever you're ready, that's all. He disappeared into the night, and Naruto sat on his bed and felt the truth of Kakashi's words like a hand pressing against a bruise. And he thought about his father, Minato, the fourth, who'd carried the weight of the entire village and made it look effortless, and then died at 24 because the weight had demanded everything. And he pressed his face into his hands and breathed. The first real crisis came at 12 weeks. Mikoto was at the market, buying vegetables for dinner, maintaining the steady, unremarkable routine that had become her camouflage. The morning had been bad. The nausea was supposed to be fading by now but wasn't, and the concealment technique was pulling harder on her reserves as the baby grew. She'd had to rest twice on the walk to the market, pressing her back against a wall and breathing through the dizziness that came and went like a tide. She was reaching for a bunch of daikon when the world tilted, not metaphorically. The ground actually shifted under her feet, her vision grayed at the edges, and her knees buckled. She caught herself on the market stall, barely, and stood there gripping the wooden edge with white knuckles while the vendor said something she couldn't hear through the roaring in her ears. Mikoto-san, are you all right? She forced her vision to clear. The vendor, an elderly Uchiha woman whose name she should know but couldn't access through the static in her brain, was leaning over the stall with an expression of alarm. Fine, Mikoto managed. Stood up too fast. Low blood pressure. You're very pale. Should I send for someone? No, I'm fine, really. She bought the daikon because not buying it would have been more conspicuous than the near collapse. She walked home on legs that trembled faintly and went straight to the bathroom and sat on the floor and ran a diagnostic jutsu over her own body with hands that shook. The suppression technique was failing. Not catastrophically, the seal tag Tsubaki had designed was handling the base load. But the baby's chakra was growing faster than they'd projected, and the gap between what the technique could mask and what the baby was producing was widening. Her body was compensating by drawing more heavily on her own reserves, which was causing the fatigue, the dizziness, the near collapse at the market. She needed to see Tsubaki. She needed to adjust the technique. She needed to rest, which was the one thing she absolutely could not do, because resting meant being visibly incapacitated. And visible incapacitation in the Uchiha compound meant questions. She sat on the bathroom floor and calculated options the way she'd once calculated mission parameters. Coldly, clinically, with the part of herself that didn't feel and didn't fear. Option 1, reduce the suppression and risk detection. Unacceptable. Option 2, increase her own chakra output to compensate for the drain. Unsustainable, she was already running on fumes. Option 3, find an external chakra source to supplement the technique. Possible, but the only person she knew with chakra to spare was the one person she was trying to keep at arm's length. Option 4, tell someone. Bring someone else into the secret who could provide practical support. She rejected option 4 reflexively, then forced herself to reconsider. Tsubaki was a resource, but she was external. She couldn't help with the daily management, the moment-to-moment concealment, the reality of living inside the compound while hiding a pregnancy. Mikoto needed someone inside, someone she trusted absolutely. Someone who could cover for her on the bad days and provide plausible explanations for her symptoms. She ran through the roster of people in her life, and it was terrifyingly short. The Uchiha women she interacted with daily were acquaintances, not confidants. The clan elders were out of the question. Her friends from her active duty days had drifted away during the years of domestic seclusion. There was one person. One person in the compound who had already noticed something wrong, who she trusted with her life, who loved her enough to keep a secret even if he didn't understand it. But he was 10 years old. She put her head in her hands and breathed. She didn't tell Itachi. The idea surfaced and she drowned it immediately, appalled at herself for even considering it. He was a child. A burdened, brilliant, prematurely aged child, but a child nonetheless, and she would not add her weight to the load he already carried. Instead, she went to Naruto, not at the river. This was the first time she'd left a message at the dead drop requesting a meeting at an alternate location, a training ground on the village's northern edge, far from both the Uchiha district and the main shinobi thoroughfares. The message was coded, terse, urgent, North Ground 14. Sunset. He was there when she arrived, and his face told her he'd been there for hours, pacing, burning through anxiety the way he burned through everything, with too much energy and not enough outlet. What happened? Is the baby's fine, I'm the problem. She told him about the collapse, the technique's limitations, the growing gap between the baby's chakra output and what she could safely suppress. He listened with his jaw tight and his hands clenched at his sides, and she watched him wrestle with the helplessness, the need to do something colliding with the reality that there was nothing he could do. There might be something, she said, but it's a risk. Tell me. The Nine-Tails chakra. If you could transfer a controlled amount to me, small, sustained, enough to supplement my reserves, it would close the gap. The technique would hold. The baby would stay hidden. He stared at her. You want me to give you Fox chakra? A trickle. Not the destructive kind, the ambient energy that leaks through the seal constantly. You regulate it already. This would just be redirecting some of it into a pregnant woman. Into a woman who needs the energy to maintain a concealment technique. The chakra wouldn't interact with the baby directly. It would fuel the suppression field. You don't know that. We don't know what Fox chakra does to a fetus. Nobody does because nobody's ever been insane enough to try. Naruto? No, listen. He grabbed her shoulders, gently but firmly, and his face was the most serious she'd ever seen it. I will do anything for you and this baby. Anything. But I won't do something that might hurt the child because we're panicking. There has to be another way. She looked at him, and the fear in his eyes, not for himself, for the baby, for their baby, cut through the operational calculus she'd been running and hit something deeper. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry, I'm scared." The admission cost her something. She could feel it leaving, like blood from a wound. She didn't admit to fear. She managed fear, compartmentalized it, used it as fuel. But standing in front of him in the fading light, with their child growing inside her, and the concealment cracking and the world closing in, the management failed, and the fear came through raw and unprocessed. He pulled her against him and held her, and she pressed her face into his chest and shook. And he didn't say anything comforting or reassuring, because he wasn't a man who offered false comfort. He just held her and let her shake, and his heartbeat was steady against her ear, and the warmth of him was real and immediate and enough. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together, okay?" "Okay." They stood in the empty training ground and held each other, and the sunset burned itself out behind the tree line, and the first stars appeared, cold and precise, and they were two people in an impossible situation trying to find a way through that didn't require sacrificing the thing they'd made. "What if," Naruto said slowly, still holding her, his chin resting on the top of her head, "the problem isn't the baby's chakra output. What if it's the technique's approach? You're trying to suppress the signature, push it down, contain it. What if instead of suppression you used disguise?" She pulled back and looked at him. "Disguise? Like a transformation jutsu, but for chakra. You're not hiding the energy, you're changing its appearance, making it look like something else. Your own chakra, or ambient environmental chakra, or, I don't know, something that a Sharingan wouldn't flag as abnormal." She stared at him. "That's, Naruto, that's actually brilliant. Don't sound so surprised. The suppression approach is brute force. I'm spending energy to contain energy, which is inherently inefficient. But if I restructure the technique as a transformation matrix instead..." Her mind was already running, the old operational intelligence firing on all cylinders. "I'd need to match the baby's chakra wavelength to my own. Overlay it, so it reads as a single source instead of two separate signatures." "Can you do that?" "I can try. Tsubaki can help with the calibration. It would require less raw chakra to maintain, which solves the reserves problem." She was pacing now, thinking out loud, and the fear had been replaced by the focused energy of problem-solving, the state she'd lived in during her active years, the state she was best in. The transformation would need to be dynamic. The baby's signature will keep changing as it develops, so the overlay has to adapt. That's the hard part. "How hard?" "Very hard. I'll need to build a self-adjusting seal matrix. It's advanced Fuinjutsu. I know the theory, but I've never done anything this complex. I know someone who might be able to help with that." She stopped pacing. "Who?" "Me." He held up his hand, and she really saw, for the first time, the faint lines of seal work that ran across his palm, remnants of his own seal, the 8 trigrams that held the 9 tails. "I've been studying Fuinjutsu for years. My dad left notes in the seal space, fragments, mostly, but enough to build on. I'm not Jiraiya level, but I understand seal architecture better than most people think. You've been holding out on me. I've been holding out on everyone. The seal stuff is personal. It's connected to the fox, to my parents, to everything I am." He looked at his palm. "But this is my kid in there, and if my dad's seal work can protect them, then it's time to stop holding out." They worked through the evening, sitting on the cold ground of the training field, sketching seal diagrams in the dirt with sticks. Mikoto's knowledge was theoretical and strategic. She understood chakra flow dynamics and transformation matrices. Naruto's was intuitive and structural. He understood how seals contained and redirected energy because he'd lived inside one his entire life. Their approaches were different enough to be complementary, and as the night deepened and the diagrams grew more complex, something took shape between them that was neither his design nor hers but a fusion of both. "Here," Naruto said, drawing a series of interlocking circles. "The transformation layer sits between the baby's output and your natural signature. It doesn't suppress, it translates. The baby's chakra passes through and comes out coded as yours. But the baby's chakra has a distinct quality. The density, the Uzumaki vitality. Yeah, he paused. We tune the filter. Not a perfect translation. That would be obvious because your chakra would suddenly look different. A lossy translation. Most of the baby's signature gets absorbed and recycled into the field itself, and only a small fraction leaks through, blended with yours. The leaked fraction would read as minor fluctuation, natural variation, which even a Sharingan wouldn't flag. They looked at each other across the diagrams in the dirt, and the shared intelligence of the moment, the meeting of two minds on a problem that mattered more than anything either of them had ever worked on, was its own kind of intimacy. We need to test it, she said. We'll test it at Tsubaki's clinic, controlled conditions. When? Tomorrow, I'll be there. Naruto, you can't be seen at that clinic. I'll use a transformation. Trust me, I spent half my childhood sneaking into places I wasn't supposed to be. Nobody will see my face. She should have argued. She should have cited the risk, the exposure, Danzo's surveillance. But the truth was that she was tired, bone deep, carrying two people's worth of existence tired. And the idea of not being alone in this, even for one appointment, was so overwhelmingly appealing that the argument died in her throat. Okay, she said. He walked her to the edge of the training ground as far as he could without entering the Uchiha district's observation radius. They stood in the dark between the trees. You should sleep, he said. I should do a lot of things. Sleep first, everything else after. She leaned up and kissed him, briefly, fiercely. Tomorrow, tomorrow. She walked home through the dark, and the compound gate opened and closed behind her, and the house was silent, and Fugaku was asleep, and the diagrams in the dirt at the training ground would be washed away by morning, but the design lived in her mind and in his. And together, they had built something that might work. She went to bed and lay in the dark and felt the baby, not a kick, not yet, but a presence, a warmth, a small, insistent aliveness that had its own gravity. And she pressed her hands against her stomach and whispered the design specifications like a lullaby. The new seal worked. Tsubaki tested it herself, pressing her glowing hand against Mikoto's abdomen and reading the output with the focused attention of a woman staking her professional judgment on the result. I can't find it, she said. The secondary signature is gone, or rather, it's there, but it reads as yours. The translation matrix is, she trailed off, shaking her head. Who designed this? Naruto was standing in the corner of the exam room, wearing the face of a middle-aged civilian man, his transformation so seamless that even Tsubaki, who knew what she was looking for, did a double take when he dropped it. Collaborative effort, he said. Tsubaki looked between them, the Uchiha clan head's wife on the cot, and the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki in the corner, and something in her expression shifted. Not judgment, recognition. The recognition of a woman who'd seen enough of the world to know that the things people did for their children were rarely rational and almost always extraordinary. The seal needs to be refreshed every 72 hours, Tsubaki said. The translation matrix degrades as the baby's chakra network develops. You'll need to recalibrate each time. I can do that, Mikoto said. As long as the base design holds, the recalibration is maintenance. And your reserves? The drain is a third of what the suppression technique required. I can sustain this. Tsubaki nodded slowly. All right, we continue with the monitoring schedule, and, she pointed at Naruto, you stop overworking yourself. Your chakra may be insane by normal standards, but stress affects seal stability. Stay calm, stay rested. Yes, ma'am. Tsubaki shook her head and muttered something about the world going mad, and they left the clinic through the back exit. Naruto retransformed and walking beside Mikoto through the quiet streets like any civilian couple. For 3 blocks, they were just two people walking together in the winter sunlight. She tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow, an innocent gesture, meaningless to anyone who might see them, and he shortened his stride to match hers, and the ordinariness of it was so sweet it ached. I wish, she said quietly. I know. Every day, I know. They separated at the next intersection, and she watched him walk away, transformed, disguised, invisible to the world, and carried the warmth of those 3 blocks with her for the rest of the day. 14 weeks. 16. 18. The seal held. The translation matrix did its work, converting the baby's growing chakra presence into something that read as Mikoto's own fluctuation. Tsubaki monitored and adjusted and kept her counsel. Naruto trained and waited and read the dead drop messages and ached. The winter deepened. The Uchiha compound grew colder in more ways than one. Mikoto could feel it, the political temperature dropping, the conversations between clan members growing shorter and more guarded, the meetings that Fugaku attended with increasing frequency. The elders were gathering momentum. Fugaku's voice, when she overheard fragments through the study door, she no longer bothered trying to open, carried the tone of a man building toward something. She tried to ask once. A quiet evening, Sasuke in bed, Itachi out. She brought Fugaku tea in his study and set it on the desk and said, carefully, "The meetings seem more frequent." He looked at her. His face was the face she saw every day, hard, proud, handsome in a way that had become abstract to her, like admiring the craftsmanship of a weapon you knew was pointed at you. They are. Should I be concerned? You should be prepared. For what? He held her gaze. She held his. The silence between them was not empty. It was packed with years of unspoken words, unasked questions, unacknowledged distance. He was deciding, she realized, how much to tell her, how much she needed to know, how much the clan head's wife was entitled to. For change, he said. When it comes, it will be sudden. I need to know that you'll stand with the clan. I've always stood with the clan. I know. That's not what I'm asking. He set down his brush. I'm asking if you'll stand with me. The question landed in the space between them like a kunai thrown at her feet. Not a threat, a test. He was measuring her loyalty, which meant he was measuring something that required loyalty, something that went beyond normal clan politics. The coup. He was talking about the coup. Not directly, not in words that could be quoted, but the meaning was unmistakable. He was asking her to commit to the overthrow of the village's leadership, to stand beside him as he led the Uchiha into direct confrontation with the Hokage. And he was doing it with the same flat, certain voice he used for everything, unyielding, allowing no space for negotiation. I will stand with what's right, she said, his eyes narrowed. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something move behind his eyes, frustration, assessment, and underneath both, the faintest shadow of something that might have been hurt. She'd failed the test, or she'd refused to take it. Either way, the distance between them widened by another increment. Good night, Mikoto. Good night. She left the study and closed the door and stood in the hallway with her back against the wall and her hand on her stomach and thought, the clock is running out. Not just on the pregnancy, on everything. The coup was coming. The clan was moving. And she was standing in the middle of it, carrying a secret that could detonate the entire situation in ways that no one, not Fugaku, not the third, not Danzo, had factored into their calculations. 20 weeks. Halfway. The baby kicked for the first time on a cold morning in January, while Mikoto was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea that had gone cold. It was gentle, a flutter, barely perceptible, like a bird testing its wings inside a small space. She set the cup down and pressed both hands against her stomach and went very still. The flutter came again, stronger, and the sensation was so familiar from her previous pregnancies and so different in its context that it broke through every layer of control she'd built and hit her directly in the heart. She was alone. Fugaku had left before dawn. Itachi was on a mission. Sasuke was at the academy. The house was empty, and for once she was grateful for the emptiness because it meant no one was there to see the tears that slid down her face. Silent, uncontrolled, released from somewhere so deep she hadn't known the reservoir existed. She cried for 5 minutes. Then she wiped her face, washed her teacup, and went about her day. That evening she left a message at the dead drop. Not coded, not operational, just 3 words. She kicked today, because Mikoto knew. She'd known since the diagnostic at 8 weeks, when Tsubaki had identified the fetal development markers. A girl, a daughter. Mikoto had not told Naruto yet, because telling him would make it more real, and more real meant more weight, and she wasn't sure how much more weight the structure of their secret could bear. But the kick changed things. The kick made the baby a person, not an abstraction, not a medical condition, not a strategic problem. A person, a daughter, with feet that kicked and a chakra signature that hummed with the combined vitality of two bloodlines that had never been meant to intersect. She would need a name. Not yet. It was bad luck to name a child too early. But Mikoto found herself thinking about names anyway, running through them in her mind during the quiet hours. Uchiha names were typically stern, traditional, heavy with history. Uzumaki names, from what she knew of Kushina's heritage, tended toward nature, water, wind, growing things. She wanted something that belonged to neither clan and both. Something that was the child's own. The thought drifted through her mind like a leaf on water, and she let it go, and the kick came again, gentle and persistent, and she pressed her hand against her stomach and smiled. Naruto found the message at midnight. He'd been checking the dead drop every evening, an obsessive ritual he couldn't break. Most days the hollow was empty. Occasionally there was a coded update, appointment clear, growth normal, seal holding. He'd raid them and burn them and go home and lie on his back and think about a heartbeat he'd never heard, but this message was different. 3 words, unencrypted in Mikoto's precise handwriting. She kicked today, she. He sat on the riverbank in the dark with the note in his hands, and the word she echoing through him like a bell. A daughter. He was going to have a daughter. The 9 tails stirred inside the seal, a vast, slow movement like a mountain shifting. Naruto felt the fox's attention focus, a sensation he'd learned to recognize, the predatory alertness that preceded one of their infrequent communications. The kit, Kurama's voice rumbled through the seal space, deep and resonant, and carrying the particular dryness that passed for humor in a 1,000-year-old entity. Breeding like his parents, Naruto didn't rise to the bait. He was sitting on the riverbank with tears running down his face and a piece of paper in his hands, and the universe rearranging itself around a single word. She. Your offspring will be powerful, Kurama continued, unbidden. The combination of Uzumaki vitality and Uchiha genetics is unprecedented. The child will carry traces of my chakra through your blood. She will be remarkable. She'll be in danger. She will be in danger regardless. That is the nature of power. It attracts those who wish to control it and those who wish to destroy it. A pause. You should be prepared. I know. Do you? Because from where I sit, and I sit inside you, which gives me an unfortunately intimate perspective, you are not prepared. You are emotional and distracted and operating without a strategy. The woman has a plan. You have feelings. The woman has a name. The Uchiha female, Mikoto. Her name is Mikoto. Kurama was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, the dryness had softened by a fraction, barely perceptible, but Naruto had been living with the fox long enough to notice. Mikoto, then. She is competent, more competent than you. But competence will not be sufficient when this secret breaks open, and it will break open. The old man in the shadows, the one with the bandages, he is already positioning. I can sense the edges of his intent through the observers he sends. Danzo's surveillance. His agents are skilled, but they have chakra signatures like everything else. I catalog them. There are currently 3 positioned within detection range of the Uchiha district on a rotating basis. Their focus has shifted over the past month. They are spending more time near the eastern perimeter. Naruto's hand tightened on the note. Near the river. Near the river. They have not penetrated the tree line during your meetings. The woman's operational security is sound, but they are tightening the net. What do? You fight, or you hide, or you run. These are the only options that have ever existed. A long, slow exhalation that Naruto felt as a wave of warmth through his body. But the child changes the equation. I have watched humans fight over their offspring with a ferocity that surpasses anything they do for themselves. You will need that ferocity, Kit. What is coming will demand it. What's coming? But Kurama retreated into the depths of the seal, and the conversation was over, and Naruto sat on the riverbank in the dark with the note in his hands, and the fox's warning ringing in his ears and the knowledge. Tender, terrifying, transformative, that somewhere inside the Uchiha compound, behind walls and secrets and silence, his daughter was kicking. He folded the note carefully. He didn't burn it. He put it in his pocket, close to his chest, and he carried it with him when he stood and walked home through the cold, dark streets. She kicked today. He pressed his hand against his chest where the note rested and felt, through the paper and the fabric and the skin and the bone, the distant echo of something he couldn't explain, warmth, rhythm, life. "I'm here," he whispered to the dark. "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." The night held no answer. But the note was warm against his chest, and the river ran on behind him, and somewhere in the compound, a woman slept with her hands on her stomach and a daughter kicking beneath them, and the world, vast, cold, dangerous, beautiful, turned toward whatever came next. Chapter 4. The weight of 2 names the baby came 3 weeks early. Mikoto had prepared for this possibility. Tsubaki had warned her that the accelerated chakra development could trigger premature labor, and they'd built contingency plans for early, middle of the night, and worst-case scenarios. What they hadn't prepared for was the timing. Fugaku was home. It was a Sunday evening in late March, unseasonably warm, the kind of night that tricked you into thinking winter was over. Fugaku had come home early from a council meeting, itself unusual enough to raise Mikoto's internal alarm, and had eaten dinner with the family for the first time in weeks. He'd even spoken to Sasuke, asking about his academy progress, listening to the boy's breathless account of a shuriken exercise with something approaching attention. Itachi had watched the scene from across the table with an expression that Mikoto couldn't read, which meant he was working hard to keep it unreadable. They'd gone to bed at 10. Fugaku fell asleep within minutes. He'd always had the soldier's ability to drop into unconsciousness on command. Mikoto lay beside him and stared at the ceiling and felt the familiar pressure of the baby's presence inside her, the steady hum of the translation seal, the low drain on her chakra that had become as natural as breathing over the past months. At 2 a.m, the first contraction hit. She knew instantly. Not the Braxton Hicks she'd been managing for weeks. This was the real thing, deep and rolling and inexorable, her body announcing that it was done waiting. She bit down on the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper and breathed through it, counting the seconds, cataloging the intensity. 30 seconds. Strong, too strong for a first contraction. She slid out of bed with the practiced silence of a woman who'd been getting up at 5 a.m. to vomit for months without waking her husband. Fugaku didn't stir. She gathered a bag she'd packed weeks ago, hidden in the back of her closet behind seasonal clothing, and moved through the dark house on bare feet. The second contraction hit in the hallway. She braced herself against the wall and rode it out, her teeth clenched, her breathing controlled, her mind running through the plan. Leave through the eastern gate, take the river path to Tsubaki's clinic, send word to Naruto through the emergency protocol. She passed Sasuke's room. His door was open a crack, and she could hear his breathing deep, even the breathing of a child who slept like the world was safe. She didn't stop. She couldn't. She passed Itachi's room. His door was closed. She was 3 steps past it when the door opened. "Mother," she turned. Itachi stood in his doorway in his sleep clothes, hair loose around his face, looking at her with eyes that were fully alert. He hadn't been sleeping. He'd been awake, and he'd heard her. And now he was looking at her bag and her bare feet and the way she was holding herself, tilted slightly, one hand bracing against the wall. And she watched the pieces come together behind his eyes with the speed of a mind that never stopped working. "You're leaving," he said. "I need to go somewhere. I'll be back. You're in pain." "I'm fine." "You're breathing in a controlled pattern consistent with managing acute physical distress. Your posture is compensating for abdominal pressure. And you packed a bag." His voice was quiet, level, stripped of everything except observation. You're going to have a baby. The hallway was dark. The house was silent. The third contraction was building at the base of her spine, and her 10-year-old son was standing in front of her with the truth on his face, and there was no deflection in the world good enough to survive those eyes. Yes, she said. Itachi's expression didn't change. He'd already known, she could see that now. He'd known for weeks, maybe longer. The morning sickness, the chakra suppression, the behavioral changes, the fatigue. He'd assembled the evidence and arrived at the conclusion and kept it to himself, waiting, watching, trusting her the way she'd asked him to trust her that night in the kitchen. The father is not father, he said. Not a question. No, how long have you known? Since December. He processed this in silence. The contraction crested and she gripped the wall and breathed through it, and when it passed, Itachi was still standing in the same spot, still watching her, and what she saw on his face was not anger or betrayal or confusion. It was calculation. The rapid, ruthless calculation of a boy who'd been trained to assess threats and identify the optimal path through impossible situations. You need to go now, he said. The contractions are close together. You don't have much time. Itachi, I'll cover for you. If father wakes, I'll tell him you went to the market early. The fish vendor opens before dawn on Mondays. It won't hold for more than a few hours, but it should be enough. She stared at him. Her brilliant, impossible, heartbreaking boy, who had just learned that his mother had betrayed his father and whose immediate response was to help her escape. Why? She whispered. He looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped and she saw the child underneath. The boy who loved his mother. The boy who'd watched her fade for years inside this house and hadn't known how to stop it. The boy who'd noticed her humming again and her shoulders loosening and the return of something vital that he'd thought was gone forever. Because you've been happier. He said simply. Since you started going to the river, you've been happier than I've seen you in years, and whoever did that for you, whatever this is, I'm not going to be the reason it falls apart. The fourth contraction hit, and this one was bad enough that she doubled over and gasped, and Itachi moved forward and caught her arm, steadying her with a grip that was surprisingly strong for a boy his size. Go, he said. Now I'll handle things here. She cupped his face with her free hand quickly, and his skin was warm and his eyes were bright in the dark, and she wanted to say 100 things. I'm sorry, I love you. You shouldn't have to do this. You're too young for this weight. But the contraction was passing, and time was passing, and the baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Thank you, she said. She left through the eastern gate. The night was warm and the sky was clear and the path to the river was silver in the moonlight. She made it 300 meters before the next contraction stopped her, and she leaned against a tree and counted to 60, and then kept moving. The emergency signal was a specific chakra pulse sent through the river itself. A technique she'd developed weeks ago. A vibration pattern that Naruto's heightened sensing ability could detect at range. She knelt at the river's edge and pressed her palms to the water and pushed. Then she kept walking. Naruto was dreaming about his mother when the signal woke him. The dream dissolved, Kushina's laugh, orange light, something about ramen, and was replaced by a vibration in his awareness, distant but distinct, like a bell rung underwater. He recognized it instantly. They'd tested it once. She'd told him to pray he never felt it for real. He was out of bed and dressed in 4 seconds. Out the window and across the rooftops in 10. The village blurred beneath him, dark buildings, empty streets, the occasional Anbu patrol that he avoided by instinct, redirecting his route with the fluid, unconscious efficiency of a shinobi who'd spent years navigating Konoha's rooftop geography. The river path. South and east. He pushed chakra into his legs, and the world accelerated. He found her halfway to Tsubaki's clinic, leaning against a stone wall at the edge of the commercial district, her face white and her jaw locked, and her hands pressed against her stomach. She looked up when she felt his approach, and the relief on her face almost broke him. You're here. I'm here. He was beside her in a heartbeat, one arm around her waist, taking her weight. How close? Close, minutes apart. Can you walk? I've been walking. Can you walk faster? She shot him a look that, even through the pain, carried enough heat to scorch. "I'm in labor, not incapacitated. Keep up." They moved through the empty streets together, Naruto supporting her weight when the contractions hit and staying close but not hovering between them. She walked with the determined, grinding endurance of a woman who'd completed missions with worse injuries than this and hadn't stopped then either. Tsubaki's clinic was dark. Naruto knocked 3 quick raps, the signal they'd agreed on, and a light appeared in the upstairs window, and 30 seconds later the door opened and Tsubaki was there in a robe, her gray hair wild, her one remaining hand already glowing green. How far apart? 3 minutes, possibly less. Inside, now, the next 2 hours existed outside of normal time. Mikoto had given birth twice before, and both times had been managed, clinical affairs in the Uchiha compound's medical wing, attended by clan medics who treated the process with the same brisk efficiency they applied to treating combat injuries. Fugaku had not been present for either birth. It was not customary. He'd been informed after the fact, visited the next day, held each son briefly, and returned to his duties. She'd recovered alone. This was different. Naruto didn't leave. He sat beside the cot and held her hand, and didn't flinch when she crushed his fingers during contractions, and didn't speak when she didn't want him to speak and spoke when she needed him to speak. He was there, present, focused, real, in a way that no one had been for her during the most vulnerable moments of her life. Tsubaki worked with calm precision, monitoring the labor's progression, managing the pain with medical ninjutsu, keeping a continuous read on the baby's condition. "The seal is holding," she said at one point, and Mikoto felt a surge of fierce gratitude for the design they'd built together. Even now, even during labor, the translation matrix was functioning, the baby's chakra reading as Mikoto's own. "She's crowning," Tsubaki said. Mikoto bore down. Naruto's hand in hers. Tsubaki's green glow guiding the process. The pain was total, consuming, the kind that erased everything except the present moment, and in the present moment there was nothing except effort and pressure and the absolute, primal drive to push this new life into the world. The cry, small, furious, utterly alive. Tsubaki lifted the baby, red-faced, wailing, fists clenched, and laid her on Mikoto's chest, and the world contracted to the size of that small body. Mikoto's hands, steady through everything, through years of combat and deception and impossible choices, shook as they wrapped around her daughter. "She's perfect," Tsubaki said. "Strong lungs, strong chakra. 10 fingers, 10 toes, perfect." Mikoto looked down at her daughter's face. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, her mouth open in a sustained, outraged howl, her skin flushed. She had dark hair, fine and wispy, but unmistakably dark, which was a genetic mercy. Her face was too new to read for specific features, too scrunched and furious to resemble anyone except herself. But her chakra. Even newborn, even unformed, her chakra hummed with a vitality that Mikoto could feel against her skin like warmth from a fire. Uzumaki vitality. Uchiha depth. Something entirely new. Naruto was staring at the baby with an expression that Mikoto had never seen on another human face. It was beyond joy, beyond wonder, beyond anything she had a word for. It was the expression of a man who had never belonged to anyone and was now looking at the most fundamental form of belonging that existed. "Can I?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Can I hold her?" Mikoto shifted the baby into his arms, guiding his hands, one under the head, one under the body, gently, gently, and watched him receive his daughter. He held her like she was made of light. His large hands dwarfed her small body, and his arms that had punched through walls and held back tailed beasts, trembled with the effort of being gentle enough. The baby's crying subsided as she settled against his chest, her tiny face turning toward his warmth, and the room was suddenly very quiet. "Hey," Naruto whispered to his daughter. "Hey, I'm your dad. I know I look like a mess right now, but I promise I clean up okay." The baby made a small sound, not a cry, something softer, an exhale of new existence. "I'm going to keep you safe," he said. I don't know how yet. I don't know anything about being a dad. But I'm going to figure it out, because you deserve the best dad in the world, and I'm going to be that. Okay. Is that okay? Mikoto watched him and felt something inside her chest that was too large for the space it occupied, something that pressed against her ribs and her throat and her eyes. She blinked, and tears ran down her face, and she let them. Tsubaki, who had been checking monitors and pretending not to watch, turned away and busied herself with supplies. Her shoulders were suspiciously tight. Naruto brought the baby back to Mikoto and sat on the edge of the cot, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand touching the baby's head with the delicacy of a man handling something he was terrified of breaking. They sat like that, the three of them, a family that couldn't exist in the daylight, and the clinic room was small and clinical and smelled like antiseptic and blood, and it was the most sacred space either of them had ever occupied. She needs a name, Mikoto said. Naruto looked at her. You haven't picked one. I wanted to pick it together. He looked down at his daughter. She'd fallen asleep against Mikoto's chest, one tiny fist curled around nothing, her breathing the shallow, rapid rhythm of a newborn. Kaori, he said. Mikoto tilted her head. Where does that come from? I don't know. It just, when I look at her, that's what I hear. He paused. It means fragrance, like something you can sense but can't see, something that's there even when you can't prove it. Mikoto looked at her sleeping daughter. Something that's there even when you can't prove it. A child who would live hidden, whose true parentage would be concealed, whose existence was a secret carried in silence. A presence felt but unseen. Kaori, she said, testing the name. It fit. It fit the way the baby fit against her chest, naturally, inevitably, as though the space had been waiting for exactly this shape. Kaori, Tsubaki confirmed from across the room. Noted, not that I'm keeping records. Tsubaki. I know, no records, no evidence, no trace. I've been doing this long enough to understand the stakes. She came to the bedside and checked the baby one more time, her green glowing hand hovering over Kaori's small body. She's remarkable. The chakra density, I've delivered a lot of babies, and I've never felt anything like this. She's going to be extraordinary. She's going to be hidden, Mikoto said, and the word tasted like ash. For now, Tsubaki met her eyes. For now. The cover story was the part Mikoto hated most. She'd constructed it weeks ago, knowing it would need to be airtight, and knowing that no story was truly airtight against the Sharingan and the paranoia of a clan in crisis. But it was the best she had, and it relied on a truth that was verifiable enough to survive scrutiny. 3 years ago, a distant branch of the Uchiha family in a small village near the border had been wiped out in a bandit raid. The details were in the clan records Mikoto had checked, and the casualties included a young woman named Uchiha Natsumi, who had been newly married and, according to the sparse records, possibly pregnant at the time of her death. Possibly. The records were unclear, which was the point. The story Mikoto constructed was this. Natsumi had survived the raid long enough to give birth. The child had been taken in by a civilian family in the border village, who had only recently discovered the child's Uchiha heritage through the manifestation of chakra abilities. Lacking the resources or knowledge to raise a shinobi child, they had contacted Konoha. The clan had directed the child to Mikoto's household, as the clan head's wife, for fostering. It was a story with enough truth to be checkable and enough vagueness to resist disproof. The border village existed. Natsumi had existed. The raid had happened. Everything after that was fabrication, but fabrication built on real foundations. The hardest part was the timing. Mikoto couldn't return home with a newborn the same night she'd gone to the market. She needed a gap, a period during which the fictional civilian family contacted Konoha, the clan processed the request, and the child was delivered to her care. She gave it a week. For 7 days, Kaori stayed at Tsubaki's clinic. Naruto visited every night, entering through the back in transformation, sitting in the dim examination room with his daughter in his arms. Tsubaki monitored the baby's health and kept her fed on a formula that she'd prepared with the same matter-of-fact competence she brought to everything. Mikoto went home the morning after the birth. She cleaned herself up, suppressed the physical evidence of labor with a medical technique that cost her more chakra than she could comfortably spare, and walked into her kitchen at 6 a.m. looking like a woman who'd taken an early morning stroll. Itachi was sitting at the table. He looked at her. She looked at him. The communication that passed between them was silent and complete. "The fish vendor was closed," she said. "That's unfortunate," he said. "There's tea." She poured a cup and sat across from him and drank it, and neither of them said anything about what had happened or what was coming. And the silence between them was not the cold silence of her marriage, but something warmer. Something that held trust and complicity, and the shared understanding that some things didn't need words. Fugaku came to breakfast an hour later. He ate, spoke briefly about the day's schedule, and left for the administrative building. He didn't ask where Mikoto had been that morning. He didn't notice anything different about her. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt a sadness so deep it didn't have a bottom. Sadness for the marriage that had become so hollow that her husband couldn't tell she'd given birth to another man's child 12 hours ago. Sadness for the man himself, grinding away at his political machinery, unaware that the foundation of his household had shifted beneath him. Sadness for what they'd been, or might have been, in a different world with different rules. She washed the breakfast dishes and felt the sadness and let it pass through her, because sadness was a luxury she couldn't afford, and because Kaori was waiting at the clinic and the clock was ticking on the cover story and there was work to do. The handoff happened on the 7th day. Mikoto had laid the groundwork carefully. She'd spoken to Fugaku about the border village situation 3 days prior, presenting it as a minor administrative matter, a clan obligation, the kind of thing that fell to the clan head's wife to manage. A child of Uchiha blood orphaned, in need of fostering. The clan's duty was clear. Fugaku had grunted acknowledgement. He was deep in coup preparations and had no bandwidth for domestic matters. "Handle it," he'd said, and returned to his scroll. She'd also spoken to the clan's records keeper, filing a formal fostering request with documentation she'd carefully forged using her knowledge of the clan's administrative systems. The records keeper, an elderly man named Teaki who was more interested in his tea than in paperwork, had processed it without question. Now she walked through the compound's main gate carrying a baby in a wrap against her chest, and the story was live. The first person she encountered was Yoruchi, Teaki's wife, who ran the senbei shop near the market. Yoruchi's eyes went wide. "Mikoto-san, is that the fostering case? The child from the border village. She arrived this morning." "Oh, the poor little thing." Yoruchi leaned in, cooing. "What's her name?" "Kaori. Kaori-chan." "How old?" "Approximately 4 months," Mikoto said, which was the age the cover story required. In reality, Kaori was a week old, but the concealment seal that Mikoto had applied. A simplified version of the chakra translation matrix, adapted for the baby's small body, made her appear slightly older to casual observation. The illusion wouldn't survive a detailed medical examination, but it didn't need to. It just needed to survive the first impression. Yoruchi clucked sympathetically and offered unsolicited advice about feeding schedules, and Mikoto smiled and nodded and carried her daughter through the streets of the Uchiha compound with her heart hammering behind her composed face. The house absorbed the baby the way it absorbed everything. Silently, with the settled patience of walls that had seen generations come and go. Mikoto set up a sleeping space in the small room adjacent to her bedroom, the room that had been Itachi's nursery before he'd moved to his own room at age 3. She positioned the crib, arranged the supplies Tsubaki had provided, and stood in the doorway looking at her daughter, asleep, peaceful, impossibly small, and felt the full, crushing weight of what she'd done. Kaori was inside the compound, inside the Uchiha clan's walls. Surrounded by people with enhanced perception and suspicious natures, and a political crisis that was making everyone more watchful, more paranoid, more likely to scrutinize anything unusual. A baby was unusual. She needed the next few days to go perfectly. She needed the story to take root, to become accepted background, to fade into the ordinary landscape of compound life. She needed Fugaku to see the baby and not look too closely. She needed the clan to accept Kaori as what she was claimed to be, an orphaned relative, a duty fulfilled, and move on. Sasuke came home from the academy and discovered the baby with the unfiltered delight of a 5-year-old encountering a new small creature. Is she ours? Can we keep her? She's staying with us. She's a relative who needs a home. She's so tiny. Why is she so tiny? All babies are tiny, Sasuke. Was I this tiny? You were tinier. He crouched beside the crib and stared at Kaori with the intense focus of a child studying something miraculous. Kaori, possibly sensing the attention, opened her eyes, dark, unfocused, new, and Sasuke gasped. She looked at me. Mama, she looked at me. She can hear your voice. Hi, baby, I'm Sasuke. I'm your, what am I? You're her family, he grinned. That gap-toothed, unguarded grin that was pure Sasuke, pure child, pure joy. Hi, family. Mikoto watched her son greet her daughter and felt joy and grief and terror and love all colliding inside her like elements in a reaction. And she held the surface steady because the surface was all that stood between her family and catastrophe. Fugaku met Kaori that evening. He came home at his usual time, later than he should have, and found the household rearranged around the presence of an infant. Sasuke was sitting in the living room talking to the baby in an earnest monologue about Shuriken types. Itachi was reading on the Ingawa, positioned where he could see both the baby and the front door. Mikoto was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Fugaku stood in the doorway and looked at the crib. Mikoto watched him from the kitchen. She watched the way his eyes moved, assessing, cataloging, the habitual scrutiny that was both his greatest strength and his most defining limitation. He looked at the baby. He looked at the crib. He looked at the room's new arrangement. The fostering case, he said. Yes. He crossed to the crib and looked down. Kaori was awake, her dark eyes open and wandering, her tiny hands grasping at air. She was beautiful, Mikoto thought, and not just with a mother's bias. The combination of features that was emerging as her newborn redness faded was striking. Dark hair, a face that would eventually resolve into something fine-boned, and an alertness that was unusual for her true age but consistent with the cover stories claimed 4 months. Fugaku studied the baby for a long moment. Mikoto's heart did not beat faster. She'd trained it not to. She stood in the kitchen with a knife in her hand and vegetables on the cutting board and watched her husband look at her daughter and held every molecule of her body in perfect, practiced stillness. She doesn't look like Natsumi, Fugaku said. She takes after the father's side. Natsumi married a civilian. The features are mixed. The eyes are dark. Many people have dark eyes. He looked at her across the room. The look lasted 3 seconds. It was the longest 3 seconds of Mikoto's life. The clan records confirm the lineage, he asked. Teaki processed the documentation himself. Fugaku nodded. He looked at the baby one more time, and then he turned away, and the moment passed, and Mikoto's knife resumed its rhythm on the cutting board, and the dinner preparations continued, and the household absorbed its new member with the same implacable silence it brought to everything. Later that night, after Fugaku had retreated to his study and the children were asleep and the house was dark, Mikoto stood over Kaori's crib and felt the adrenaline crash hit her like a wave. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the crib's edge and stood there, shaking, breathing, letting the fear she'd been suppressing for hours finally surface and pass through her. He'd looked. He'd questioned. He'd accepted the answers, but the look in his eyes in those 3 seconds, she couldn't categorize it. It wasn't suspicion, exactly. It was something adjacent to suspicion, something that lived in the same neighborhood. Attention. Fugaku had looked at Kaori with attention, and attention from Fugaku was never casual. She needed to be perfect. For weeks, for months, for however long it took for Kaori's presence to become unremarkable. She needed every detail of the cover story to hold. She needed the baby's concealment seal to function flawlessly. She needed her own behavior to be exactly what was expected, a clan matriarch fulfilling her duty. Nothing more, nothing less. She could do this. She'd been performing for a decade. This was just another performance with higher stakes. She touched Kaori's cheek. The baby stirred, turned toward her hand, and settled back into sleep. The warmth of that small face against her fingers was the most real thing in the world. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." Naruto met his daughter for the first time outside the clinic on a Tuesday night, 2 weeks after the handoff. Mikoto brought Kaori to the river. It was reckless, the most reckless thing she'd done since the affair began. But Naruto hadn't held his daughter since the night of her birth, and the deprivation was eating him alive. She could hear it in his dead drop messages, which had grown shorter and more strained as the days passed. The last one had been 2 words: "Please, soon." She waited until midnight. Fugaku was at a council meeting that would run until 3 a.m. She knew the schedule because Itachi had quietly confirmed it, a collaboration that had become wordless and seamless. She wrapped Kaori in dark cloth, suppressed both their chakra signatures, and slipped through the eastern gate like a shadow. He was at the river. Sitting on the rocks, staring at the water, his body coiled with the particular tension of a man holding himself in check through pure will. He felt her approach and turned, and when he saw the bundle in her arms, his face did something that defied description. It collapsed and rebuilt itself simultaneously. The mask of composure he'd been wearing for weeks simply dissolved, and underneath was naked, unfiltered want. She placed Kaori in his arms. He sank to the ground. Not dramatically, not intentionally, his legs simply stopped working. He sat on the cold rocks with his daughter against his chest, and his head bowed over her, and he didn't move for a long time. "She's grown," he said finally. His voice was wrecked. "She's bigger. Babies do that. She smells different than I remember. She smells like the compound, like wood and incense. She smells like you." Mikoto sat beside him, and they looked at their daughter in the moonlight. Kaori was awake. She'd been a calm baby from the start, content to observe. Her dark eyes tracking movement with an alertness that Tsubaki said was advanced. And she was staring up at Naruto's face with the concentrated intensity of a small creature determining whether something was safe. "Hey, Kaori," Naruto whispered. "Remember me? I'm the one who held you first, although technically your mom did most of the work." Kaori made a sound. A small, wet gurgle that could have been anything but that Naruto clearly interpreted as recognition, because his face split into a grin so wide and so genuine that it seemed to generate its own light. "She remembers me. She's 3 weeks old. She doesn't remember anything. She remembers me." "Look at her face." Mikoto looked. Kaori was, objectively, doing nothing remarkable, staring upward with the unfocused curiosity of a newborn. But her body had relaxed against Naruto's chest, settling into his warmth with the boneless ease of a creature that felt secure, and Mikoto couldn't entirely dismiss the idea that some form of recognition was at work. Chakra signatures were inherited. Kaori's body knew its father's energy the way it knew its mother's milk, on a level below conscious thought. "She has your chakra," Mikoto said. "Not exactly, but the quality, the warmth. Tsubaki says she's never seen prenatal chakra density like Kaori's, and it hasn't decreased since birth." "It's still growing." Naruto looked up. The grin faded into something more serious. "Growing how?" "Her chakra network is developing at roughly 3 times the normal rate. Tsubaki thinks it's the Uzumaki vitality combined with Uchiha genetics. Both bloodlines carry strong inherent chakra, and the combination is multiplicative, apparently." "Is that dangerous?" "Not yet, but it makes the concealment seal critical. Without it, her chakra signature would be conspicuous even to non-sensor types. With it," Mikoto gestured at the sleeping compound in the distance, "nobody notices, and the seal is holding. I recalibrate every 3 days. It's holding." He nodded, absorbing the information with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered. Then he looked back down at Kaori, and the seriousness softened, and he was just a father holding his daughter in the moonlight. "I want to be there," he said. Every day. I want to watch her grow. I want to be the one she reaches for when she's scared. I want to teach her to walk and throw a kunai and make terrible ramen. His voice cracked on the last word, and he pressed his lips together and breathed. I know I can't. I know the situation. I know the reasons. But I need you to know that every day I'm not there is a day I'm choosing the wrong thing for the right reasons, and it's killing me. She leaned against him, shoulder to shoulder, the way they'd sat 100 times on these rocks. I know. When does it end? The hiding, the cover story. When do I get to be her father? I don't know. The honesty was brutal. She didn't soften it because he deserved better than false comfort, and because the truth was that she couldn't see a path from where they were to where he wanted to be. The Uchiha crisis was escalating. Danzo was watching. The cover story was fragile. And the idea of Uzumaki Naruto, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, the most visible shinobi in the village, openly claiming a child with the Uchiha clan head's wife, was so explosive that she couldn't think about it without her tactical mind recoiling. There will come a time, she said carefully, when the situation changes. The coup, whatever happens with the coup, will reshape everything. When the dust settles, there may be an opening, a moment when the truth can surface without destroying everyone it touches. And until then, you're a man who visits the river at night, and I'm a woman who fosters an orphaned relative, and our daughter grows up in a house that isn't fully hers, loved by a mother who can't explain why the love is so fierce. He was quiet for a long time. Kaori had fallen asleep against his chest, her small fist closed around the fabric of his jacket, holding on with the unconscious grip of a newborn. I named her, he said. At the clinic, Kaori, something you can sense but can't see. I remember. I didn't know how true it would be. They sat on the rocks while the night deepened around them. The river ran, indifferent to the human drama on its banks. The compound loomed in the distance, a dark mass of walls and rooftops and sleeping secrets. When the time came to leave, Naruto transferred Kaori back to Mikoto's arms with a reluctance that was almost physical, his hands lingering on the baby's body, fingers touching her face one last time. Same time next week, he asked, and the hope in his voice was so naked it cut. I'll try. Mikoto, I'll be here. She walked home with Kaori sleeping against her chest and the night air cold on her face and the taste of inadequacy in her mouth, the knowledge that she was failing everyone in different ways, simultaneously. Failing Naruto by keeping his daughter from him. Failing Kaori by raising her under a lie. Failing Itachi by making him complicit. Failing Sasuke by building his world on foundations that could crack. Even failing Fugaku, who for all his faults had not chosen to be deceived. The compound gate opened. She passed through. The house waited, dark and still. She put Kaori in her crib and stood there, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, and felt the weight of two names. The name the child carried and the name she didn't, pressing down on her like stones. 3 weeks after Kaori's arrival in the compound, Danzo made his first move. Naruto was training alone at the northern grounds when Sai appeared. Not from the shadows, that would have been too theatrical for Root. He simply walked onto the field from the main path, hands at his sides, pale face expressionless, carrying the body language of someone delivering a routine message. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto stopped mid-kata. He knew Sai. Most Jonin knew Root operatives by sight, even if they couldn't prove affiliation. Sai's blank effect and too-perfect social mimicry were tells in themselves. Lost, Naruto said. Danzo-sama requests a meeting. Tell Danzo I'm busy. Danzo-sama anticipated that response. He asked me to inform you that the meeting concerns. Sai paused with the calibrated timing of someone reciting a script, matters of personal significance related to the eastern perimeter of the Uchiha district. The air left Naruto's lungs. He kept his face neutral. He'd learned that much from Mikoto, but something in his eyes must have shifted because Sai's gaze sharpened by a fraction. Where? Naruto said. The administrative building, sub-level 3, 1 hour. Sai turned and walked away. Naruto stood in the training field and felt the world narrow to a point, the way it did before a fight. Every sense sharpening, every calculation accelerating, Danzo was making contact. Danzo was letting him know, through implication, through the reference to the eastern perimeter, that he knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Naruto ran through his options. He could ignore the summons. He could tell the third Hokage. He could run. He could go and find out exactly how much Danzo knew and what he wanted. He went. Sub-level 3 of the administrative building was a place that didn't officially exist. Naruto navigated it through directions Sai had provided, down corridors that grew progressively dimmer and more featureless, until he reached a door that looked like every other door in the hallway, but that hummed faintly with suppression seals. He opened it. The room was small, windowless, lit by a single lamp. Danzo sat behind a bare desk, his bandaged arm resting on the surface, his visible eye fixed on the doorway. He looked, as always, like a man carved from something harder than flesh, angular, still, patient in the way that geological formations were patient. "Sit," Danzo said. "I'll stand." "As you prefer." Danzo's eye tracked him as Naruto positioned himself near the door, not sitting, not relaxing, maintaining the exit. "You know why you're here. You're going to tell me. I'm going to offer you an opportunity. But first, let me be transparent about what I know so we can dispense with the tedious phase of denial." Danzo folded his hands. "You have been conducting a clandestine relationship with Uchiha Mikoto, wife of the Uchiha clan head, for approximately 6 months. The relationship is sexual in nature. It has produced a child, a girl, born approximately 4 weeks ago, currently being raised inside the Uchiha compound under a fabricated identity." Each sentence hit Naruto like a physical blow. He held still. He breathed. He did not react. The child's chakra signature, despite an impressive concealment technique, carries markers consistent with Uzumaki lineage. My analysts identified this within the first week of the child's presence in the compound. Danzo's voice was flat, clinical, utterly without emotion. "The cover story, the fostering of a deceased relative's child, is adequate for the clan but would not survive the scrutiny that I have applied to it." Silence. The suppression seals hummed. "What do you want?" Naruto said. "I want what I have always wanted, stability, order." "The continued security of Konohagakure." Danzo leaned back slightly. "The Uchiha situation is approaching a critical juncture. Fugaku is weeks away from committing to open action. The third Hokage lacks the resolve to prevent it. We are careening toward a conflict that will devastate the village, unless someone intervenes decisively. And that's you. I have resources. I have plans. What I lack is a specific piece of leverage that would allow me to neutralize the Uchiha leadership without a full-scale confrontation." His eye held Naruto's. "You are that leverage." "How?" "Fugaku's authority rests on 2 pillars, his political position and his personal honor. His political position is entrenched. The clan elders support him, the police force is loyal, and his strategic competence is genuine. Undermining him politically would require months of maneuvering that we don't have time for." Danzo paused. "His personal honor, however, is more fragile. If it became known that his wife had betrayed him, with the 9 tails Jinchuriki, no less, the psychological and social impact would be catastrophic. His authority within the clan would collapse. The coup would fracture before it could launch." Naruto understood. The understanding was instant, total, and nauseating. "You want to expose us. I want to expose the affair in a manner that maximizes the destabilizing effect on the Uchiha power structure. The timing and method would be calibrated to, you want to use my daughter as a weapon." Danzo's expression didn't change. "I want to use information as a tool. The child's existence is information. Information has no moral quality, only applications." Naruto's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs and willed them still. The 9 tails stirred inside the seal, a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through his bones. "And if I refuse? Then the information reaches Fugaku through other channels, less controlled channels." without the strategic calibration that would minimize collateral damage to the individuals involved. Danzo's eye was steady. I am offering you the opportunity to participate in how this truth emerges. The alternative is that it emerges without your input, in a manner that serves my objectives regardless, but provides no protection for the woman or the child. That's not an offer. That's a threat with a bow on it. It is a realistic assessment of your options. I take no pleasure in this, Naruto. I have no personal interest in your domestic arrangements. But the village security supersedes individual concerns, and if the Uchiha coup succeeds, the death toll will be measured in hundreds. Your affair, by accident, has produced the most effective tool for preventing that outcome. I would be derelict in my duty if I failed to utilize it. Naruto looked at the man behind the desk. Shimura Danzo, War Hawk, Shadow Player. A man who genuinely believed that the world could be made safe through the strategic application of ruthlessness, and who had spent a lifetime proving himself right often enough to justify the belief. He wasn't evil. That was the worst part. He was rational, disciplined, and operating from a framework that prioritized collective survival over individual suffering. And within that framework, everything he'd just said made perfect sense. Using the affair to break Fugaku's authority was elegant, efficient, and would prevent a coup that could kill hundreds of people. The cost, Mikoto's destruction, Naruto's exposure, Kaori's weaponization, was, in Danzo's calculus, an acceptable price. How long do I have, Naruto asked, to decide? 1 week. The Uchiha timeline is accelerating. Every day of delay increases the risk of a confrontation that I cannot control. And if I go to the 3rd? Hiruzen will agonize. He will convene committees. He will seek diplomatic solutions that don't exist. And while he deliberates, the Uchiha will act. By the time he reaches a decision, it will be too late. Danzo stood slowly, the movement carrying the weight of decades. I am not your enemy, Naruto. I am the only person in this village who is willing to do what is necessary. Consider my offer. Naruto left. He walked through the sublevels and up the corridors, and out into the sunlight and across the village to his apartment, and he sat on his bed and put his head in his hands and felt the walls closing in. 1 week. He had 1 week to find a way to protect his daughter, protect Mikoto, prevent a coup, and outmaneuver the most dangerous political operative in Konoha. He thought about Kaori's small fist gripping his jacket. He thought about Mikoto's face in the moonlight. He thought about Fugaku's expression, the one Mikoto had described, the unreadable look when he'd first seen the baby. He thought about what Kurama had said. What is coming will demand ferocity. He stood up. He splashed water on his face. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, blue eyes, whisker marks, the face of a man who had spent his entire life being underestimated, and he set his jaw. 1 week. He didn't need a week, he needed a plan. And for that, he needed the one person whose strategic mind was sharper than his, whose understanding of the Uchiha was deeper than anyone's, and whose stake in the outcome was as total as his own. He left his apartment and headed for the river. Mikoto listened to everything. They sat on the rocks in the fading afternoon light, and Naruto recounted the meeting with Danzo word for word. His recall was nearly perfect when adrenaline was involved, and Mikoto listened with the absolute stillness of a woman processing a threat assessment. When he finished, she was quiet for a full minute. He watched her and saw the intelligence working behind her eyes, the rapid cycling through options and implications and countermoves that was the hallmark of a mind trained for exactly this kind of crisis. He's bluffing, she said. Partially. Which part? The timeline. He says 1 week, but Danzo doesn't operate on other people's timelines. He operates on his own. He gave you a week to increase the pressure, but his actual window is larger. The coup isn't imminent, it's building, but Fugaku hasn't committed to a specific date. Danzo knows this because he has intelligence inside the clan. He has people inside the Uchiha. He's had people inside the Uchiha for years. Her voice was flat. Who do you think has been encouraging the more radical elements? Danzo doesn't just react to crises, he cultivates them. The Uchiha grievances are real, but the acceleration toward confrontation has been assisted. Naruto stared at her. He's pushing the Uchiha toward a coup so he can justify crushing them. He's creating conditions in which his preferred solution becomes the only solution. It's what he does. He did the same thing during the Third War, manufactured the intelligence that led to the Kanabi Bridge mission, which created the circumstances that justified expanding Root's authority. She paused. I know this because I was involved in the intelligence review afterward. The evidence was clear, but by the time it surfaced, the outcomes Danzo wanted were already locked in. Then his offer to use us, the affair, it's not about preventing the coup, it's about controlling how the coup fails. Exactly. If the coup collapses because of a personal scandal, Danzo controls the narrative. The Uchiha were led by a man who couldn't control his own household. The dishonor validates every prejudice the village holds against the clan. Danzo gets his justification for permanent suppression without the mess of a military confrontation. And we're the tools. We're the tools. She looked at the river. But tools can be turned. He leaned forward. What do you mean? Danzo's leverage is the secret. He has information we want to keep hidden, and he's threatening to release it in a manner he controls. But leverage only works if the holder maintains sole possession. If the secret is released before Danzo deploys it, if we control the timing, the context, the narrative, his leverage disappears. You're saying we go public. I'm saying we consider it, not blindly, not reactively, but if we can choose when and how the truth comes out, we take the weapon out of Danzo's hand. Mikoto, if Fugaku finds out, Fugaku is going to find out. That's no longer a question of if. It's a question of whether he finds out from us or from Danzo, and which version of the truth gives us the best chance of survival. The river moved. The light shifted. They sat on the rocks and looked at the future, and the future looked back, and it was not kind. There's another element. Mikoto said, Itachi, your son, my son, who already knows about the pregnancy, he figured it out the night Kaori was born, who's been covering for me. And who is, separately, involved in the clan village negotiations in ways that I don't fully understand, but that place him at the center of whatever happens next. What do you mean, at the center? I mean that the third Hokage has been using my 10-year-old son as an intelligence asset inside the Uchiha compound. And I've known about it for months, and I've let it continue because the alternative, Itachi acting without my awareness, was worse. Naruto's face went through shock, anger, and something colder that settled behind his eyes. The third is using a child as a spy. The third is desperate, and Itachi, he's not a normal child. He sees the coup for what it is, clan suicide, and he's trying to prevent it from the inside. The third is giving him the channel to do that. And Danzo is almost certainly in contact with Itachi as well, offering his own version of the solution, his own terms. Her voice tightened. My son is being pulled in 3 directions by 3 of the most powerful men in the village, and none of them are telling him the full truth, and I am adding to his burden by making him keep my secret. Then we take the burden off him, all of it. We stop hiding, we stop letting other people control the board, and Naruto stopped, ran his hands through his hair. I don't know what we do, I just know that we can't keep playing defense. Not with Kaori in that compound, not with Danzo holding a blade to our throats. Mikoto took his hand. Her grip was firm, warm, certain. We have time. Not much, but some. Danzo's weak is artificial, he won't act until the conditions optimize and we can influence those conditions. She met his eyes. We plan, we prepare. We identify every variable we can control and every variable we can't, and we build a strategy that accounts for both. And when the moment comes, when the truth breaks open, we're standing ready. Together. The word hung in the air between them, and it was not a romance but a pact, not a wish but a weapon. And they held hands on the river rocks as the evening fell and began to plan. That night, Mikoto put Kaori to bed and stood in the nursery doorway and looked at her sleeping daughter, and the moonlight came through the window and fell across the crib like a blessing. And the baby's face was peaceful and small and utterly unaware of the forces arrayed around her. Down the hall, Fugaku's study light was on. He was in there with scrolls and plans and the architecture of a revolution, building toward a confrontation that would change everything. Across the compound, Itachi sat on a rooftop in the dark, watching the district sleep, carrying the weight of his loyalties like a boy carrying a boulder. In a windowless office beneath the village, Danzo reviewed reports and calculated timelines and moved pieces on a board that only he could see. And by the river, a young man with his mother's bright eyes sat in the dark and held a folded piece of paper against his chest. She kicked today, and thought about a daughter he could not claim, and a woman he could not protect, and a world that was closing in. Mikoto pressed her hand against the doorframe and felt, beneath the fear and the strategy and the weight of two names, the thing that had started all of this. The thing that burned quiet: love. Stubborn, inconvenient, catastrophically timed, and absolutely unextinguishable. She closed the nursery door. She went to bed. She lay in the dark beside her sleeping husband and felt the compound walls pressing in and the world pressing in and the future pressing in, and she breathed, and she planned, and she waited. The clock was running. Chapter 6. What we leave behind the climax. The coup attempt, the village response, Naruto's role in preventing full-scale massacre. Itachi's choice diverges from canon this time. His mother's secret and his baby sister's existence change the calculus. The final confrontation isn't just physical but emotional. Naruto facing Fugaku, Mikoto facing the clan elders, Itachi facing Danzo. Sacrifices are made, but the massacre is averted at great cost. The aftermath reshapes Konoha. Naruto claims his daughter openly. Mikoto's fate, Fugaku's fate, the Uchiha clan's fate, all resolved in ways that honor the complexity of what came before. The story closes on a scene that mirrors the opening, but everything has changed. Subplots Itachi's burden, visible in every chapter. His awareness grows, his impossible choices multiply, and the baby sister he never expected becomes the thing that finally cracks his stoic facade. Danzo's web. Each chapter includes at least one scene from this angle. He's not evil for evil's sake. He genuinely believes order requires control, and this scandal is a tool, nothing more. Kushina's echo, through seal space conversations and Naruto's memories, Kushina's friendship with Mikoto haunts the narrative. She would have understood. She might have been furious. The ambiguity is the point. The Uchiha coup, the political engine driving the external plot. It's not background noise, it's the ticking clock that makes every personal choice catastrophic. This is a story about people making impossible choices in a world that punishes vulnerability. And what happens when the truth, like a child, refuses to stay hidden, ready for